any money in it, she wouldn't have left it there.
Just take your time. It's a tough crowd back there. This is agenda item 1.
These mine. Those are yours. No, you got 3. Yeah. Got it?
Board's back in session. We're on agenda item 19. At this time, the board will hear about, the board will hear about water quality concerns at Mule Creek State Prison. The board will also consider a resolution recommending that the prison be regulated under the State Water Board small MS4 permit. Please be aware that this is not a hearing to discuss potential enforcement actions, and I need to reinforce that. This is not a hearing to discuss potential enforcement actions. There are ongoing settlement talks between the board and the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, otherwise known as CDCR. And these settlement talks are addressing alleged prior violations of the Clean Water Act. Therefore, discussions of what enforcement the board should take or how much or how little CDCR should be fined for any past violations are outside the scope of today's discussion. Anyone testifying today must respect this limitation on the scope of the discussion. All persons expecting to testify, please stand, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer I do. Thank you very much. CDCR is a party to this proceeding and has been granted 10 minutes to address the board. Jim Scully and Richard and Virginia Silva have been granted designated party status by the board at their request. Jim Scully has been granted 5 minutes to address the board, and the Silvas have been granted 5 minutes to address the board. Though these times are short, CDCR has already committed to enrolling under the small MS4 permit. This means that the issues being discussed today do not require lengthy evidentiary discussions. As designated party, Mr. Scully and the Silvas will be allowed to cross-examine any other parties, including the board or CDCR. And by the board, we mean the parties that will be sitting, the members of the board that will, board staff will be sitting at the tables in front of us. However, any time used for cross-examination will be subtracted from their allocated time. Following the testimony and cross-examination of the board, CDCR, and the designated parties, interested persons will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. Then we're talking about us folks up here. CDCR will then be allowed to make a closing statement, and the board will then take a closing statement from the executive officer. Please state your name, address, and affiliation, and whether you've taken the oath before testifying. If you haven't submitted a speaker card yet, now is the time to submit one to Ms. Lanfranchi Rosardi, sitting at the staff table up here to my right. Does Regional Board Advisory Team Council have any legal issues to discuss at this time? I see you shaking your head no. Is that correct?
Not at this time.
Thank you. We'll now hear the staff presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Kim Sellards, and I'm a supervising engineering geologist here in your Rancho Cordova office. I joined this office in May 2018, and prior to that, I worked for the State Water Board's Office of Enforcement. This presentation is an informational item, as well as a request for the board to adopt a resolution. Please stop me at any time if you have questions. Today's presentation will cover 5 topics: a brief overview of the facility, a discussion of the releases that CDCR has reported, regional board involvement at the site, including site visits, water sampling, and enforcement actions, and a summary of the data that CDCR has collected to date. Then I will turn the presentation over to Elizabeth Lee in the Point Source section, who will bring a resolution requesting the board to approve submitting the facility to the State Water Board for designation as a small municipal separate storm sewer system. Mule Creek State Prison is located in the town of Ione in Amador County. It's about 30 miles southeast of our office. The prison opened just over 30 years ago in June 1987, and it covers 866 acres. The prison is managed by CDCR. The original prison, referred to as the Old Prison, has several industries managed by the Prison Industry Authority, including a coffee roaster, meat processing plant, and a textiles plant. In addition, the Old Prison has machine shops, welding shops, underground storage tanks, a hospital, and formerly a dry cleaners. In 2016, the Mule Creek Infill Complex, or MCIC, was built to house additional inmates. The MCIC and the Old Prison facility, they're on opposite sides of Mule Creek, and they have independent stormwater systems. The on-site wastewater treatment plant is regulated by the Central Valley Water Board under a waste discharge requirements permit. The treatment plant receives domestic and industrial wastewater from the Old Prison, the Mule Creek Infill Complex, and the nearby Cal Fire facility. The plant is designated to treat domestic wastewater to secondary disinfection standards. Effluent is then stored in an on-site reservoir and later spray irrigated on land application areas on-site. In 2017 and 2018, Mule Creek Prison also obtained 3 stormwater permits. The first is a no exposure certification, or NEC, under the Stormwater Industrial General Permit, and the second and third stormwater permits are construction stormwater permits for installing underground piping, one for the Woodard Bottom Pipeline Project and one for the Stormwater Culvert Project around the Old Prison facility. So this is a map of the Old Prison facility, and if you take a look at the red shape in the photo, that's the outline of the perimeter stormwater system at the Old Prison. Stormwater and drop inlets at the Old Prison facility discharge through pipes called laterals to the perimeter stormwater system. The perimeter stormwater system was previously an unlined ditch. In August of 2017, CDCR began a culvert project to line portions of the ditch and also to install vaults. The photo on the top left shows a finished portion of the culvert project. That culvert project is still ongoing. Stormwater collected in the perimeter system drains to one of 3 basins. The bottom left photo shows the largest basin. These basins contain gates. When the gates are open, discharge flows to Mule Creek via 2 unlined ditches, which are indicated by the yellow lines. The picture on the right shows one of the 2 unlined ditches that flows to Mule Creek. Wetland vegetation is present in this ditch year-round, which indicates that there's frequent discharge. On December 28, 2017, the Water Board received a complaint related to the Stormwater Culvert Project at the Old Prison. The complaint included photos, videos, and a verbal description of the flows occurring from stormwater laterals at Mule Creek State Prison during the dry season between August and October of 2017. The complainant described the discharge as variable, with flow from laterals suddenly starting and stopping, and other laterals constantly trickling. In addition, the complainant stated that the discharge varied, sometimes being black with solids and odor, and then sometimes being clear with no odor. The complainant stated that he had been told the discharges had been occurring for many years prior. The board is working with CDCR to find the source of this discharge, and it is CDCR's working hypothesis that the discharge is related to the use of its irrigation system. These complaints also led to a series of media reports that brought attention to the water quality issues at Mule Creek State Prison. response to the complaint, board staff from the Construction Stormwater Unit and also from the non-Chapter 15 unit, which regulates waste discharges to land, conducted an inspection on January the 4th, 2018. At the time of the inspection, several laterals were discharging despite over a week of dry weather, and also no visible irrigation occurring at the time of the inspection. Board staff confirmed the discharge was entering Mule Creek. Board staff collected water samples from 2 locations. The first location is the largest collection basin that you saw in the previous picture. And the second location is the lateral near Guard Tower 4, which was specifically referenced by the complainant as a consistent point of discharge. Results showed detections of coliforms, fecal coliforms, and E. coli. Metals including aluminum, iron, and lead were also detected, as well as oil and grease and MBAS. Many of these constituents are typically associated with industrial activities. Over the course of about a year, board staff have conducted 9 inspections at the facility since we received the complaint. Board staff have collected samples from the stormwater system twice, soil piles used as backfill or borrow material in the culvert project, the wastewater treatment plant's effluent, 7 nearby domestic supply wells, and from a groundwater monitoring well at the facility. Beginning in mid-January 2018, CDCR began collecting daily samples from the stormwater system under the direction of the regional board. They also submitted a plan in March 2018 to continue sampling the domestic wells. That plan was conditionally approved by board staff and was required to be implemented by the 3rd quarter of 2018. On January the 23rd, 2018, the regional board required that commingled stormwater be contained on site and then processed slowly through the facility's wastewater treatment plant as capacity allowed. CDCR installed 14 Baker tanks, each holding about 22,000 gallons. However, the flows could not be contained with the on-site tanks on several occasions during storm events. During these events, CDCR opened the slide gates to release the commingled stormwater to Mule Creek in order to avoid having the water come in contact with the lethal electric fence, avoid flooding the guard towers, and also to avoid flooding adjacent properties. Commingled water that was processed through the wastewater treatment plant was not processed slow enough, and it caused an upset at the plant. Prior to October 2018, CDCR removed the temporary storage tanks. As of October 1st, 2018, CDCR proposed to release commingled stormwater to Mule Creek if the forecast shows 0.1 inches in 1 hour or 0.3 inches in 24 hours. Board staff have informed CDCR that this may be a violation of the Clean Water Act. In total, CDCR has reported about 12 unauthorized releases or spills to the Office of Emergency Services resulting in over 20 million gallons of commingled stormwater being released to Mule Creek. Yesterday, we received another report from CDCR, and another 4.8 million gallons was released. So that now takes our total to about 25 million gallons. On January the 12th, the Regional Board issued a notice of noncompliance for failure to obtain a construction stormwater permit for the culvert project. On January the 18th, the Compliance and Enforcement sent CDCR an email directing them to cease discharge based on the January the 4th samples. On February the 14th, the board issued an investigation order under Water Code Section 13267, directing CDCR to investigate the source of discharge and submit a work plan to sample the discharge and groundwater. On February the 16th, Compliance and Enforcement staff met with CDCR to discuss the investigation order. On February the 20th, the Regional Board issued a second notice of noncompliance for failure to obtain a construction stormwater permit for the culvert project. On April the 20th, Compliance and Enforcement staff met with CDCR. On June the 21st, the Regional Board issued Water Code 13260 order requiring CDCR to submit a report of waste discharge. That's the regulatory pathway for CDCR to obtain a permit for the discharge. On August the 17th, 2018, CDCR submitted a source investigation report that included closed camera television, or CCTV, dye testing, and smoke testing. On October the 30th, staff met with CDCR. Since October the 30th, staff have continued to meet with CDCR to resolve compliance issues at Mule Creek State Prison. As part of the stormwater investigation, CDCR collected samples on a daily basis from several locations within the stormwater system between January and October of 2018. Total coliforms, fecal coliforms, and E. coli were detected in almost every sample. Biochemical oxygen demand, or BOD, chemical oxygen demand, or COD, volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and semi-volatile organic compounds, SVOCs, oil and grease, turbidity, and metals were also detected at concentrations above the applicable regulatory limits. Detection limits used by CDCR were higher than typically used in detection monitoring for VOCs and SVOCs, so it is possible that these compounds are present more frequently than the data reflects. The path forward is to obtain compliance by enrolling Mule Creek State Prison in the small MS4 permit, which will require investigation and elimination of unpermitted non-stormwater discharges. CDCR has also committed to continuing source identification studies and will be conducting additional monitoring. Board staff are also working to obtain a resolution to enforcement issues. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to Elizabeth Lee.
I just have a question, or a clarification, perhaps. You commented they received a permit for the discharge, and I think what you mean in the regulatory sense is they're receiving a permit which discusses the applicable maximum limits that they can discharge up to. Is that, I mean, I don't want somebody to think that, oh, we're permitting them to just discharge anything.
Are you referring to the no exposure certification, the NEC?
Well, when you were going through the different things, I just took that quote, received a permit for the discharge, and I don't exactly know which one it was.
So I think we've got a permit that regulates their wastewater treatment facility, and I think you're actually right. I heard that too. It's a permit that regulates the discharge.
I just want to make that
not
sure.
necessarily a permit.
They get a permit for their discharge, like
That
an
sets the
MPDS
limits.
permit or a waste discharge requirements, and that permit has the
The requirements to protect beneficial uses.
Thank you. That's exactly what I meant. Thanks.
Thank you for the clarification.
Let us get back to where we need to get back to. Good afternoon, Chairman Longley and members of the board. My name is Elizabeth Lee, and I am a Senior Water Resources Control Engineer in the Rancho Cordova office in the Stormwater Program, and I have taken the oath. As Kim just noted, I will be discussing the specifics on the small MS4 permit designation and its requirements. Before I begin, I would like to give a bit of background on municipal stormwater. In most communities and facilities, there are two systems of underground pipes. One is a sanitary sewer system that collects sewage from homes and commercial buildings and delivers it to wastewater treatment plants. The other system is a storm sewer system that drains stormwater away from developed areas to prevent flooding. This is done using a system of roads with drainage systems, gutters, pipes, and ditches. In most cases, the storm sewer system does not go to a treatment plant. It goes directly into a stream, river, lake, or the ocean. The goal of the Municipal Stormwater Program is to minimize the discharge of pollutants from storm sewer systems. We call these systems MS4s. MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. So in order to ensure that MS4 operators effectively minimize water quality impacts from municipal stormwater discharges, the State Water Board adopted the small MS4 permit in February 2013 and subsequently amended it in December 2017. This permit applies to a subset of MS4s that are less than 50,000 in population. The permit allows for an appropriate regulatory approach for different types of small MS4s, traditionals and non-traditionals. Traditionals are MS4s in a city or county which are operated throughout a community. Non-traditionals are MS4s which are operated within military bases, large hospitals, universities, community services districts, fairgrounds, state recreational areas, and prison complexes. There are two ways MS4s are designated into the small MS4 permit. The first is to be designated by the State Water Board at the time the permit is adopted or when the permit is revised. The second is to be designated by the Regional Board on a case-by-case determination. The Regional Board designation must be based on the potential of a small MS4's discharges to result in exceedances of water quality standards, including impairment of designated uses or other significant water quality impacts, including habitat and biological impacts. The process for Regional Board designation is as follows. The Regional Board designates the small MS4 following public review and comment. Following approval of the designation by the Regional Board, the State Board's Executive Director may amend the permit to add the MS4. The Executive Director will consider the record of proceedings and comments submitted to the Regional Board. For Mule Creek State Prison, the Executive Director will accept additional comments until February 11th, 2019. Once Mule Creek State Prison is enrolled into the permit, they are required to create and implement an effective MS4 program that includes all of these components. Specific components that will address local concerns are number 4, the illicit discharge and detection elimination component, which requires them to map their MS4 discharges, sample the discharge, create procedures for investigation and elimination of illicit discharges, and investigate and eliminate those illicit discharges. Item number 6, the pollution prevention and good housekeeping component, which requires them to create stormwater pollution prevention plans for high pollutant generating areas within the facility and routinely assess, inspect, and maintain their MS4 system. Item number 8, the program effectiveness assessment and improvement plan, which requires them to manage and evaluate their stormwater program, improve their stormwater program effectiveness in protecting water quality, and document their compliance with the permit. And item number 9, annual reporting, which requires them to summarize their past year activities for each component listed and certify compliance with all the requirements of the permit. Comments on the tentative resolution were received from Jim Scully and Robert and Virginia Silva, who are here today and will be speaking shortly. Mr. Scully and the Silvas live less than 2 miles south of Mule Creek State Prison. Mr. Scully and the Silvas are in favor of further regulating Mule Creek State Prison and are opposed to the designation of the prison into the small MS4 permit. They would like a stronger regulatory response from the Regional Board. The designation into the small MS4 permit is the first step in the regulatory response. And with that, staff recommends the adoption of the proposed resolution. This concludes the presentation. I'd like to enter this presentation and the supporting documents into the record. At this time, Kim and I can take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Any questions from board members? Thank you very much. The board is ready to receive testimony by CDCR.
Good afternoon, Chair Longley, members of the board. My name is Gregor Larrabee. I'm the Chief of Environmental and Regulatory Compliance for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I work here in Sacramento, support the department statewide. I'm here today to convey to you how seriously the department takes the issues identified by the board at Mule Creek State Prison, and I'd like to give you a quick overview of the events or the efforts we've initiated in response to those issues. So we were notified, as stated a moment ago by the board, on 12 January of the issues and the sample results from 4 January. And then we were asked to stop discharge to Mule Creek on the 18th of January. On the 19th, Mule Creek State Prison closed all outfalls to the Mule Creek, stopping any flow. On January 25th, Mule Creek initiated weekday sampling. They could not sample during the weekends. They did not have a laboratory contract in place that allowed for that. February 18th, the institution plant staff conducted dye tracing of the sanitary sewer system throughout the central utility core, which leads to the outfall at Guard Tower 4, which was reported as having continuous flow. They also did the vehicle sally port, which is the origin of that central corridor. So the toilet in the vehicle sally port, all of the yard toilets, and guard towers, toilets in guard towers 3, 4, 5, and 6. That dye tracing resulted in no observed dyes being released to the stormwater collection system. However, they did find dye at the wastewater treatment plant, which is where it should be going through the sanitary sewer system. February 16th, Mule Creek State Prison initiated daily sampling, 7 days a week, in accordance with the request from the board for all the constituents identified in their previous correspondence. On March 15th, CDCR submitted the work plan for conducting a site-wide investigation of the stormwater collection system to the regional board. On March 23rd, Mule Creek deployed 14 Baker tanks for the purpose of trying to collect stormwater and allow for its retention and slow release to the wastewater treatment plant in lieu of going to Mule Creek. March 26th, we began the site-wide investigation to identify the sources of constituents of concern. That included the conduct of CCTV within the sanitary sewer and stormwater collection systems through the same central utility corridor that leads to the outfall at Tower 4. Smoke testing of the sanitary sewer system throughout the central corridor and perimeter lines, previously referred to as laterals. The investigation also resulted in the identification and correction of some facility practices that are disallowed. So washdown, outdoor washdown that may have led to stormwater infiltration, and a maintenance record review. The investigation also attempted to assess groundwater, irrigation water, potable water, and wastewater at the institution, and also conducted soil assessment. We collected background samples from the outlying areas of the prison near our property line, throughout the perimeter ditch for stormwater, and of a construction borrow pile that was being utilized during the construction culvert project. On April 5, 2018, CDCR found it necessary to develop a stormwater release protocol to protect our wastewater treatment plant, the institution grounds, and neighboring properties. And as you can see in the picture, that's a rainfall event where we got greater than 1/10 of an inch of rain in much less than 1 hour. And you can see in the background of this photograph those Baker tanks that were deployed for the purpose of collecting stormwater. And this is our stormwater culvert that's underwater here. You can see in the foreground a guard tower where the door to access that tower is about halfway underwater. It's just not possible to collect that volume of water in a period of time that it can be diverted or retained before it will overflow the facility. Behind that guard tower is our lethal electrified fence, which if the water reaches the bottom of that, it's required to be de-energized. So it's quite a mess. And so the stormwater protocol has already been referenced. It means we open up those outfalls to Mule Creek if we have a forecast of rainfall that's greater than 1/10 of an inch of water in an hour period, or 3/10 of an inch of water in a 24-hour period. On April 10th, 2018, we submitted a notice of intent to seek coverage under the construction general permit in response to the notice of noncompliance issued by the board. On April 12th, we received notice of coverage under the construction permit. I'd point out that this construction project has been shut down since November of 2017. The institution is maintaining best management practices. On April 16th, submission of a preliminary investigation report to the regional board, which basically covered what we'd done to date and forecast that we would be late in submitting the final report in order to complete our investigation effort. April 19th, we did some additional dye tracing in the center utility corridor to verify that the meat packing plant and main kitchen loading docks were in fact plumbed to our sanitary sewer system rather than to the stormwater system, and we confirmed that fact. On May 8th, the institution applied for coverage under the industrial general permit and uploaded our no exposure certification, NEC. And on the 22nd of May, we were granted coverage under the industrial general permit. July 27th, we received confirmation of the renewal of our NEC coverage under the industrial general permit. That's July 27th, 2018. And August 17th, we submitted our final investigation report of findings for the investigation that was conducted under the March 15 work plan. Uh-oh. Sorry about that, I lost something there. I can proceed without slides, I think. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the Department of Corrections takes this issue very seriously. We're fully committed to identifying any source of illicit discharge and dealing with it appropriately. I believe we've worked cooperatively with the board, and we continue to do so. Some of the things that we have in the works right now are some additional investigation steps. We're working with a recognized entity, third party, in developing a sample or an assessment plan that'll further evaluate water, both stormwater and non-stormwater, coming into the stormwater collection system at the institution, with the point of identifying what the issues are so that we can develop the appropriate action in response. We have no objection to the petition for MS4 coverage, and I'm here and happy to answer any questions I can.
Thank you for your presentation. Questions?
So at this point, you still haven't figured out where these illicit discharges are coming from?
Well, our initial investigation suggests to our consultant that there are two significant impacts to the stormwater system at the institution. The first one is irrigation, the irrigation system for all of the prison yards that's in poor repair and has documented leaks in it. And the second one is groundwater recharge in the center corridor area. The institution has a history of maintenance activities related to water intrusion in a couple of the buildings on that center corridor where flooring has delaminated from moisture content coming through the slab foundation. It's documented for several years in arrears. We've had 2 projects since 2010, if I recall correctly, to install a French drain first and a sump pump to draw that groundwater out from underneath one building in particular, our CTC. It's a hospital facility. And then more recently, in a recent infill project, we installed additional ground sumps to grab groundwater from that building and direct it to stormwater.
Very good. Any further questions? Yes, Dan?
Mule Creek had an original design for the number of people there, and there's a whole lot more there. Was the original wastewater plant, how is it able to handle that capacity?
Actually, I'm not really prepared to talk about that capacity, but I have a couple notes, if you'll excuse me for a moment. So our current wastewater treatment plant is more than capable of treating the amount of waste effluent that's generated daily. I think currently we have about, honestly, I can't tell you because I don't have those numbers.
I will note for Board Member Markham, this conversation here today is primarily about the MS4 system. It's a separate permit that regulates the waste discharge requirements for the sewage facility on the property. That's the one where we were going through those slides. There's a spray field that they direct that water, or irrigation system that they direct that water to.
So we'll go back to the topic at hand.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions?
So there is no identification of the source for the coliform results that were noted in the presentation?
No, sir. Our consultant believes that it's a non-human source. We've initiated some sampling to try and refine that analysis to better understand where it's coming from, but to date, we haven't concluded that.
Any further questions? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
At this point in time, and you might stand by, at this point in time, I invite cross-examination of the board staff that's presented, or of CDCR by Mr. Scully. Do you have any questions asked of them, sir? Either of the board staff or the gentleman that just testified.
If you could come forward, sir.
Could you come forward and speak into the microphone?
Did I answer your question?
No, you didn't.
Okay, try it again.
Okay.
First, if you could identify yourself for the record.
Yeah,
My name's Jim Scully. I live about a mile south of the prison.
okay.
Now, what was your question again?
My question was, do you have any questions? In other words, do you wish to cross-examination either the board staff here or the gentleman who just testified from CDCR?
I may wish to cross-examine your board staff, but I noticed he didn't stand and raise his hand when we all swore, so he's gonna have to do that, and that would be Mr. Palupa.
Okay,
I'm not sure if I'm going to cross-examine him, but I might, depending on what happens here.
Well, this is your opportunity.
Okay, if I could have Mr. Palupa, have him be sworn in by your clerk, then we'll get going.
You did not swear in, sir?
Yes, I did. Like I say, it's not right that I have to swear under.
These folks have sworn.
Exactly. Is Mr. Palupa did
Oh,
not stand
I will
and
swear to
raise
tell the
his-
truth.
There we go.
Okay, you have a question.
Here's some pictures. Now, at first you're gonna think, well, this doesn't have to
Start
do
the clock.
with our permit, but it goes as to accuracy of information passed to you by staff. Those pictures are part of a letter that I sent this board directly in June regarding the Woodard Bottom wastewater disposal field. Those pictures were taken the first week of June, and they show groundwater less than 3 feet from the surface on a discharge field that was supposed to originally handle 650 acre-feet of water from the prison. When I sent this picture in, first week of June, I was contacted by phone by Mr. Palupa, and he advised me that he had removed these pictures. He was concerned about a prejudicial effect it might have on the board on a potential upcoming enforcement hearing with corrections officials. He went on to ask me, that I please not contact anyone in corrections, as they didn't want people to know they're looking at them. What happened? I mean, I don't understand how this board feels it can make any kind of a judgment on anything, much less Mule Creek, when your procedures allow your staff to remove pertinent staff from incoming information. It doesn't make any sense. And anyway, like I said, I just want, is there any part of this that you contest?
Well, what I can say is that you brought the matter to my attention, and you submitted a series of documents to the regional board. At the time, we had a conversation, it was a fairly lengthy conversation, in which I said the regional board is looking into matters with both CDCR, and you expressed your concern about Ione and Ione's treatment plant and construction at the Woodward Bottom. At that point, I referenced Kim Sellards, who was the newly hired director of our enforcement program, and I mentioned to you that it would behoove you to contact Ms. Sellards directly and relay your concerns to her. I also entered in those documents to Ms. Sellards so that she could have them as part of an enforcement case file, regardless of whether the board wanted to initiate enforcement proceedings against either CDCR or against Ione. And so it was up to her discretion, working with Andrew Altaboat, about whether they would be gathering additional evidence and taking an enforcement action against Ione, or whether they would be gathering additional evidence and taking an enforcement action against CDCR. And so I turned that.
Telling me that? Because I don't remember any of that. I remember you telling me, call Ms. Sellers.
You asked me to respond to your direct
I asked
question.
you a yes or no question, to be honest with you, but that's okay.
Well, I mean, to place those pictures in context, that's the background. That's
Okay.
what occurred.
Okay, so, but we do understand that those pictures were definite evidence as to the potential of this field. And it goes back to your staff removing evidence that should be seen by you before you make any kind of a determination. Again, the prejudicial effect, and.
So I'm asking what the.
Pardon?
Recall that this is cross-examination, so.
No, I'm sorry, we're done with your cross, I'm sorry.
Are you through with cross-examination?
Yeah, I don't need,
Then I'll call you back up later, thank you.
Okay, well, I think.
I'll call you back up later, sir.
are you talking me or?
Yes, I'm talking to you.
Okay, so do I?
Dr. Longley?
And at this point, I'm ready to ask the, yes.
Dr. Longley, I believe it would be time for his direct, if his direct testimony.
Well, we have a process, and I intend to follow the process. And at this point in time, do Richard and/or Virginia Silva have questions of either the previous gentleman who testified from CDCR or from other members of the board staff? No. Okay, thank you. Since that's the case, sir, it's your turn to go ahead and provide your testimony.
Okay. Okay, and again, these are the photos. They demonstrate that corrections clearly overestimated and grossly overestimated the potential disposal capacity. And again, this is all with the experience that we know when you're denied relevant information, how can you make this decision? I'm sorry, this does not seem to be the enforcement hearing that I was talked to about. This seems to be something a little bit different. And I understand that, yes, you're looking at giving them this possible permit, but, you know, where is the report that pinpoints the actual location of the contamination? Where is the cleanup and repair plan? Like you said, this is not a settlement hearing. I'm going to disagree with you. I've had other people look at this. They say, yeah, this is a settlement hearing. Where's the money?
Mr. Scully?
Pardon?
Maybe I can help elucidate this a little bit.
As long as it's on your 5 minutes, I don't care.
That's fine. You're correct that this is not a settlement hearing or an enforcement hearing today. That may occur in the future. Today is only considering getting a resolution to get them in as part of the small MS4 permit. Anything regarding any remediation or penalties, all of that will be discussed in the future, not today.
Well, you know, like I say, that's all well and good, but I haven't heard anybody, corrections or your staff, mention that little part in there where it gives them 10 years to come into compliance. That's number 18. That seems a little long for an outfit that's been constantly contaminating for the last 2 decades. And yeah, I can say that. I have seen it myself. I have no problem testifying to that under oath. Again, it seems to me you're putting the cart before the horse. I would like to see a little bit more rigid investigation and a little more act like an enforcer before you go around giving them the permit to basically contaminate the same amount of level for 10 years before anybody takes a look at it, because that's essentially what I'm reading in there. Now, again, 10 years.
That was the timer that went off.
Okay.
I'll give him another couple minutes. Can you
Can I
wrap
ask,
it up? Yes.
can I answer any questions for you all? Because quite frankly, in watching this and on other things, there are voids that are a concern at times. And this is one of them, when your staff takes stuff that, I mean, I could see if this was a multiple homicide and there were screwdrivers sticking out of bodies, but I don't see how a photograph of a ditch with water in it is prejudicial.
First of all, Ms. Scully, I deemed, as one board member, I deemed this to be a necessary recommendation to the state board, resolution to the state board to place them under the MS4 program. Under the MS4 program, that gives this board certain tools, if you will, that it can use to further get at solving exactly what's going on out there. And we want those tools. We want those tools for our staff to have as they go out to resolve this particular issue. So I don't think that this is some sort of a cover-up issue at all. I think this is a necessary action to be able to do our job as we should. And any other questions for Mr. Scully?
And just want to confirm, I did not use the word cover-up. I used the term settlement.
Settlement, okay. What, I know you did.
Just to confirm.
Yeah.
I can't remember, there was one other thing, but that's okay. Based on what you just said, word for word, can you give me your verbal commitment that if you give this thing, that there will indeed be enforcement and correction action within 6 months to a year? Can you give me that right here, right now? Doesn't sound like I'm asking for much.
I can simply tell you that the board is directing staff to take the appropriate actions to resolve this issue. I can't give you a time schedule.
Okay, but you are going to take some enforcement action? Appropriate action, that's a little count. Appropriate action is enforcement. I'd like to hear those come out of you.
Well,
I'd like to hear those words
I
come out of the
expect-
board that's supposed to enforce these.
Mr.
expect
Scully,
So-
maybe Patrick, could you outline, or Jessica, the process that moves forward when this is adopted?
Oh, that's okay, that's okay. I don't,
But
I think
I'm
it's
not
important
interested in the process.
It is a
finish.
way to address your
So
question.
maybe I
please.
can help again.
Yeah, but let me finish what I was saying.
Sure.
If enforcement turns out to be appropriate, then that will be part of the package.
If enforcement
Turns out to be appropriate, then that will turn out to be.
I see. Can I get the name, will you be the determiners of what is appropriate? Will you be, or will your staff be?
That comes back to the board.
Come back to the board. Okay. Any questions I can answer for you?
Any further questions, members of the board?
But I just think as a concerned citizen, you know, we appreciate you coming forth and raising the concerns with the passion that you've expressed.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll be in touch.
Yes, I have a card from Virginia Silva.
Good afternoon. I'm Virginia Silva. We oppose the designation of Mule Creek State Prison as a small MS4. It appears, thank you. This appears to be another example of the Water Board's rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. This permit is another piece of paper in another attempt to cover up the fact that the current Mule Creek State Prison sewer system does not have the capacity to transport or treat the sewage generated by Mule Creek State Prison. The piping transport system under the buildings in the prison has degraded to the point that it leaks raw sewage, A, domestic from the actual prison, inmates, staff, etc., and B, the industrial from the prison industries, coffee grinding, meat packing, laundry, etc., into the storm drainage system and the surrounding ground before it even gets to the inadequate treatment plant. In 1985, the Department of Corrections signed a contract with the County of Amador, the City of Ione, and the Amador County School District to build Mule Creek State Prison. The contract stated that when the prison reached 1,700 inmates and a new improved sewer system treatment plant would be built. This contract is still valid. That's important. The contract is still valid. The prison opened in 1987. It is now 2019. That's 32 years. There is no new sewer system. There has been no increase in treatment capacity. What we do have is a list of disasters, each one followed by a notice of violations, then a cease and desist order to Mule Creek State Prison. The orders are not completed. This happened in 2006. Notice of violation issued, then a C&D order issued, order rescinded by the Water Board in 2013, rescinded. However, the violations listed in order were never corrected. Another spill in 2013, notice NOVs issued, no response, so C&D issued. Then a new WDO was written for the Mule Creek State Prison in 2015. New NOV issued 2018. Then a C&D was issued. Status still active. The wet winter we had in 2016 and 17 through 16-17 completely overwhelmed all of Mule Creek State Prison's antiquated sewer system, including their storm drainage system. An attempt to repair this storm drainage system uncovered massive problems with the sanitary industrial sewage system that had been leaking for a long time. It revealed ongoing water and soil contamination, with raw sewage from Mule Creek State Prison being flushed into Mule Creek. Sending NOVs and C&Ds to corrections has not been successful. We are suggesting 3 permanent solutions. 1, repair the destroyed sewer system plumbing and build a new treatment plant that was agreed upon in 1985 that could handle all the sanitary and industrial sewage from Mule Creek State Prison and prison industries, along with an improved stormwater system that is actually used for stormwater. 2, downsize the number of inmates, staff, and or the PIA operations so that the current sewage system, once repaired, could safely handle the amount of sewage generated. 3, continue the current charade until the contamination from Mule Creek State Prison sewage is so severe and widespread that the federal government will have to step in. Also, I have one question, if I can at this point, from the prison people. What is the water in and water out total? I've been trying to get this answer from several different people and still haven't to date. Total water in and water out. Is there any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Silva?
And Ms. Silva, your question is how many How much water going into the treatment plant and how much is coming out of the treatment plant? Or coming in where and,
total water going into, into the treatment plant and coming out. Yeah, yes.
just want to make sure.
Right.
And is Department of Corrections have the information to provide?
They'll be up here in a moment. We can ask them then. But we will ask them at that point in time.
You know,
Thank you.
for what it's worth, I think we may have that information consistent with our waste discharge requirements. The CDCR does provide us monitoring information about the operation of its wastewater system. So to the extent that that information isn't there, when it's submitted, it's public record, and we'll see if we can get that information to you in the future.
Good, thank you.
And I'd just like to say to Ms. Silva, and this also goes for Mr. Scully, that, as concerned citizens, you certainly shined a light on something. I don't think that there's going to be any, people forgetting about this. You guys have done a really good job in making sure that that somebody's watching and somebody cares. And to the extent there's an explanation, we'll hear it. If there's not, then you can rest assured that you guys have done a good job. So I appreciate you guys being
We've been at this for about 28 years. I don't consider that a good enough job, but finally we have an opportunity. Thank you.
I have a card for Larry Holtz.
Yes, I'm Larry Rhodes. I'm just a concerned citizen. This permit you guys are trying to get, I really believe it should be an industrial permit. This place built lifeguard towers of fiberglass not long ago. Used acetone and MEK there. There was also a spill from the dry cleaners that ruined 2 wells that they ain't talked about. And you can ask Mr. Israel, Amador County Health Department, about that. I know there was some litigation over it, and there was a young child involved in this, and they don't want to bring that up. They haven't been a good neighbor. They were supposed to build a tertiary plant, which they didn't do, on 5 acres. Supposed to handle 745,000 gallons, and at one time they were pumping almost 900. And matter of fact, the water agency, you can check with them, they were running 1 million gallons through there at a time. So I don't know if you have any records of this. But I really believe, and there's a nitrogen problem, they make the landowners that raising crops how much nitrogen they're putting on. They started that this year to the water board, and they're pumping almost 24 hours a day nitrogen out of their sewer plant. And you don't have to report nothing of that. Only time it's not doing is when it's raining, supposedly. Then it overflows, and in 1996, I believe it was, a flood, their pond overflowed, breached, sewer pond. Nobody ever heard a word about it. I work for the state of California, so Caltrans, kind of know this stuff. And I just think they should, if you're going to do anything with a permit, it should be an industrial permit. It does says prison of industries, and it's always going to be a prison of industries. There's one more little thing I'd like to say. The new prison is basically a mental hospital. And all the pills they take, there ain't nothing that's going to clean up those pill leftovers in the people's urine in there. It's going to go in the creek. And that is a concern. It's going to be a big concern someday. It's not right now, but it's really, you guys ought to be looking at that. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
Patrick, I'm curious. The gentleman, thank you very much. I do appreciate all the residents that have come forward. But I'm wanting to ask you the question that he just raised. Why isn't there an industrial permit on this facility?
So the statewide industrial permit regulates certain subcategories of activities that are articulated in federal statute. The collection system out there is not consistent with any of those categories. So it would fall instead under the small MS4 permit. So it's a matter of what's the regulatory classification. If they went and did outdoor construction and an outdoor industry, those type of industries would indeed fall under the industrial general permit. I think that the small MS4 gives us the ability to track down if there are any activities like that that are presenting water quality problems and sources that could potentially discharge to surface water. But a lot of in terms of the industries, we're not talking about industries that are covered under the industrial general permit, which tend to be those industries that have components that are in operation outside, can be exposed to the rain, can pick up pollutants and then discharge to surface water. So it's certainly a concern. I think we've got both the industrial permit, the small MS4, the construction stormwater permit. Those are all under the same component of the Clean Water Act as sources that need to be addressed. And the requirements are actually quite similar. You develop a plan, you zero in on the pollutants, and you do the monitoring to confirm that there isn't any sources within your system, whether it's an industrial system, whether it's a small MS4, whether it's a construction site, that are impacting or downstream beneficial uses. So I think that recommendation, that industrial permit, I think that is actually well received by myself. They need a stormwater permit. I think after talking with our technical staff, the stormwater permit that fits that activity classification a little better is the small MS4 stormwater permit.
They need that, but if we identify activities that the waste stream should be handled separately, that's a third permit. It's also a third treatment system. It's a whole separate entity that may have to be separated out of this.
Absolutely.
But I agree with you. We need the MS4 permit to be able to go in and identify those particular activities and, if necessary, put them on a separate schedule.
And I think that's entirely consistent with how the stormwater program works. If you look at like the cities of Los Angeles,
Right.
Humongous MS4 system, extraordinarily complicated. And what they do with that MS4 permit is they tend to zero in on the industrial discharges, and then they check and make sure that the industrial discharges that are discharging into that MS4
You get 'em
are
out of it.
appropriately regulated,
You get them out of the MS4.
absolutely, or you have them put that treatment on to make sure that they're not impacting the waste.
Right.
So it's a much, obviously a much smaller scale than the city of Los Angeles, but it's the same concept that you zero
Right.
in, you find the sources, and you deal with them.
And that's true for any MS4 system. Have a card from David Anderson.
Good afternoon, Chairman Longley, board members. I'm David Anderson. I've taken the oath. On January 20th, 2018, CDCR was served with a cease and desist order directing CDCR to no longer discharge into Mule Creek as the discharge was comprised of grease, soap, heavy metals, and raw sewage. CDCR was later served with a water board order on February 14th ordering CDCR to investigate and determine the source of the cross-contamination affecting the storm drain system. To date, CDCR has not announced that the source of the cross-contamination has been determined, and CDCR has reported that the investigation is incomplete. It is apparent that the discharges from the storm drain system at Mule Creek represent combined flows from the sanitary sewer system and the storm drain system. The EPA designation for an MS4 regulated small municipal separate storm sewer system cannot have combined flows. 40 CFR 122.26 parentheses B parentheses 8 states, quote, municipal separate storm sewer means a conveyance or system of conveyances which is not a combined sewer. It appears that the CDCR Mule Creek's prison is not eligible for the MS4 designation and that enforcement should remain consistent with a NPDES permit. For the past year, CDCR has not been compliant with any of the orders issued by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Discharges continue into Mule Creek in defiance of water board orders to redirect the discharge to the sewer plant. Investigations that were ordered by the water board to CDCR to investigate and correct the cross-contamination of the storm and sewer systems have been late, incomplete, and misleading. The final report, which was due from CDCR in March, was not completed and submitted until August of 2018 and attributed the sewage discharge to bird waste. No final report has been issued by the Regional Water Quality Control Board on the veracity of the CDCR findings to date, presumably because a complete and thorough investigation would conclusively show that the bird waste contamination is not a factor and that the Regional Water Quality Control Board would be obligated to pursue perjury charges against CDCR for false and misleading statements. Since the cross-contamination was identified in January 2018, no progress has been made identifying and terminating the illicit discharges. No fines have been issued. No individuals held accountable. No predictions on when the investigation will be complete and repairs completed. In light of the current situation, I find it inconceivable that any consideration should be given to the change of the discharge standards of Mule Creek Prison to an MS4 designation. This seems to raise issues of the objectivity of the Water Board to independently and hold CDCR accountable for longstanding and egregious violations. The State of California Water Board appears to have conflict of interest holding the State of California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to the same standard the private sector has to comply with. I hope that the Water Board recognizes the gravity of this situation and recuse themselves from any further action in this matter pending federal involvement by the EPA and others. Today it appears there is a rule for CDCR and another for everybody else. Uneven enforcement and preferential treatment erodes public trust and serves no one. And I would like to remind that even staff indicated that these are commingled flows and that the 65 acres is what we're talking about in terms of the area involved in a stormwater system. If you have any questions.
Questions from members of the board?
No, I missed the first part of your testimony, but what I heard seems right on point. I mean, we've got the person that does this work for the California Department of Corrections, and he's hearing everything that you're saying. I mean, I appreciate sort of the comments and you're right. We are accountable, and we got to make sure we do a good job.
Well, just to give you some, to pin people down here, in June of 2018, staff was advised of the likely source of where this contamination is coming from. Staff, which is present today, has not been able to make that happen, and CDCR is aware of what this hypothesis is of where to look, and they have willfully not looked. So when they say they've done a complete and thorough investigation, absolutely not true. It's just, it would take 10 minutes to go take a look where this contamination is coming from.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
If I would add a
Thank
comment,
you.
I think I don't want anybody to be under the illusion that there was a complete and thorough investigation at this point. The investigation is ongoing. CDCR's commitment to get under the small MS4 permit is symptomatic of the fact that there is some type of water quality concern that they need to continue to investigate, continue to monitor. For what it's worth, the combined sewer system is actually a term of art in the Clean Water Act, which is not quite consistent here. That's when you intentionally plumb a wastewater system into a stormwater sewer system. It's much more common back on the East Coast. That's actually where the controversy involving that McKinley Park construction here in Sacramento, but those are very different matters.
I understand
here.
that, but the real effect is you have, even though it's not done intentionally, you have combined flows. It doesn't, the statute does not say that they have to be separate systems. They're just simply saying they're combined, and you're getting the effect of a combined flow.
Which is,
In fact, CDCR's staff just told you a few minutes ago that this is likely stormwater flows off the yard or groundwater. There's sewage involved here.
I think that's an open question. I mean, to be perfectly frank, the investigation that has been conducted thus far by CDCR has not shown that it's sewage, and that they are going to be required and going to be committing significant financial resources to answer that question once and for all. And so, I appreciate your testimony. I think that with respect to the water board, we're working to hold their feet to the fire. I think we have some questions. I know you state them as positions that have already been answered, but I don't think we have answered the question as to whether that is sewage or not. But from the board's perspective, and just, you know, kind of the 10,000-foot view, when you have coliform hitting the water, it doesn't matter if it's from birds, it doesn't matter if it's from people, it still needs to be addressed through a permitting action. And that's why we're here today, to try and make sure that that's addressed through a permitting action. We are also, and I won't go into the details of it, but we are also committed to continuing to negotiate with CDCR on what to do about the past alleged violations, whether there will be an enforcement action that imposes monetary fines for that is something that will be discussed at another time.
And I understand that, and I really kind of thought that the bird waste issue, even though you're, you know, right that it needs to be addressed, was really probably an effort to avoid increased fines if it's naturally occurring. But I think everybody's here today is trying to look to the future. You know, are we actually solving something? Is this MS4 designation going to fix it if you have combined flows? I don't know.
Well, I think, and I think the answer is yes, it will fix it. The combined MS4, if you have non-stormwater flows coming into that system, it is the obligation of the permittee to find those and to eliminate those.
Right.
And the regional board, and you're hearing it from especially Kim today, we're going to be looking at all those reports that get submitted once they get under that small MS4 permit. If they're not doing the due diligence under that permit to find non-stormwater, to track it down, and to eliminate it from its system, there's two ways of going about it. You either kind of wind up with another huge enforcement action, cease and desist order, or you put a treatment plant in to kind of treat that stuff before it goes to the surface water. So, I mean, that's the options out there, and I think we're doing our due diligence to make sure that beneficial uses are protected.
Staff was advised in June of last year where to look, and we're standing here and it's February.
You say staff, you're talking about CDCR staff?
No, I'm talking about your staff.
Our staff.
And we get them under a permit, and I mean, because we don't do the corrective action, right? We don't own a CDCR system. So essentially, we get them under a permit that requires them to do the necessary actions. And so 6 months later, I mean, I wish permitting actions could go quicker, but that type of thing takes a while.
Is there any compelling reason why we haven't been able to finish this investigation? The local newspaper found a plumber that said he could do it in, you know, a month or less for $25,000, and CDCR is saying that they've spent $2 million to date and have nothing to report and no findings of any consequence.
I think, you know, particularly when you're, and again, as a non-technical expert, I think Adam Lapitz could talk about it in greater depth. I think the frustration that you have is typical of a lot of frustration that we've heard in front of the regional board. But a frustration that, you know, when you talk to the technical staff and when you talk to the scientists, they say, well, look, you've got a relatively complex groundwater system out there. I've been working in that area. I know not just in Mule Creek's facility, but ION's, but ARSA's facility, but the combined systems up there, the prevalence of the clay structures out there. There's a lot of complex water quality concerns out there. And when we just found out about these type of things about a year ago, and I think that's really when the most urgent issues that we're discussing here daylighted, getting a result where CDCR is making a commitment to do significant permit upgrades. They've spent a lot of money. I think that's consistent with us fulfilling our regulatory function. But again, reasonable minds can differ. I think I hear from you. It's not going quick enough, and I think that, you know, it's up to Kim's staff from here on out to continue to light the fire and make sure that CDCR proceeds with all due haste to figure out what those water quality concerns are and address them.
Well, just to voice the concerns of the community here, they have no faith in CDCR whatsoever, and kind of shaken in the Regional Water Quality Control Board for the amount of time and the authority you have to hold their feet to the fire and determine where this is coming from. The implications, I think we kind of need to bring it out. The implications are, if it's coming from where everybody believes it's coming from, it's exceedingly difficult to repair, exceedingly expensive, which raises the specter of the state of California. I mean, at the end of the day, you're all state of California. Who's going to foot the bill? And the community kind of knows this. They just want to have it fixed. They're not the ones paying for it. State of California.
We're talking about this unknown source of contamination that you seem to have knowledge of. Could you address that?
Yeah. The hypothesis is that it's not the storm drain system, which is exterior to the buildings. Those pipes are SDR-35. They're plastic PVC pipes, and they're well-proven, long histories. As a matter of fact, one of my friends has helped install that, and I really had a difficult time understanding how could you get those systems to fail until I realized that it's under the buildings. They don't use those pipes. You have to, by code, you have to use cast iron pipes, and the cast iron pipes are much lighter, subject to corrosion easily. Under the best of circumstances, the service life of a cast iron pipe is 30 to 50 years. But when you add highly corrosive materials, and all of what's coming out of the industries is very corrosive, the soaps, the dishwashing fluids, all of them under really high temperature and exposed to these corrosive elements, those lines will fail in probably a year or two.
Well, I've seen those kind of lines without corrosive materials failing in probably 10, 15 years, simply
Correct.
because of the soil properties.
Right, yes,
So-
and that's an element that could be also in there. But I know just from the soaps, we got copies of the hazardous materials manifest that are held by the Amador County Environmental Health, and it showed soaps, just your standard soaps, and these soaps are industrial strength soaps that have to be stored in plastic containers, because if you put them in even dry in bulk in a metal container, it'll eat right through it. So you put that with hot water going down storm drain pipes, you're going to corrode the system in just no time at all. And if you go back in time in history, 2006, the dry cleaning plant failed, and that's what contaminated the adjacent water well. So nothing has changed. And if you are talking about system failures underneath buildings, extraordinarily expensive, and I'm not even sure how you can repair it.
Excuse me. And, you know, that
Yes,
is,
Bob.
that is the hypothesis. And you
Right.
classified it, or you characterized it as that, and actually I appreciate that. Because as Patrick has said, we have not been able to authorize, should we choose to do so, the studies under the criteria or quality assurances that the board requires to ensure, to turn something from a hypothesis into what's really happening there. And I want to say a few more things. I appreciate your testimony a lot, and that's, I want to say first, our job is to meet water quality standards, and we've been pretty damn diligent about it, actually, over the years that I've been on the water board. And I think I started in '99. And, you know, this is the first prison I've had to really look at, but it doesn't matter where we've been. It can be cannabis or forestry or irrigated lands program. We've been, I think, considering the limited resources that our board has, fairly stringent. I think we will do a very good job here. I am looking at this now as, you know, we're partnering with, and you can say we're sister agencies. We are both with the state of California, but we really have to commit, and I think through this permit, we're seeing a commitment from CDCR, and the Water Board is very committed to move this forward. And this is the first step for us, so we can really, in a more official manner, and Patrick will, or Jessica will certainly correct me if I misstate anything, but we can actually, you know, there are requirements now that the prison is committed to meeting, and they will have to meet in terms of how they monitor, what they monitor, to really get on top of this now. And I am apoplectic that, you know, we're where we are. I share that concern. And I want to say one other thing is, you know, we have some residences here. I've been reading the paper articles. This has been called to my attention. And, you know, we can't do our job without a partnership with the public, too. And I completely understand your mistrust. I've shared that in my past work. I'm just hoping that over the next couple of months, we move in a direction that you'll at least grudgingly say, I'm glad something's happening, so.
Well, I hope so. And I'll leave you with this one thought. If it's happening here, and this is an abysmal failure to date, where else is it happening? I almost, would take an educated guess that this isn't the only spot.
And
keep
we
you
don't know
awake at
that, and that, that's our staff looks at those issues. And I think what's important here a little bit is what Patrick said, is this is somewhat unique with the clay layers and the hard pans that you find in this area. So we just, we got to figure this out, and it will get figured out. And whether it applies to other areas, if we may be the first to begin to look at that issue, or perhaps the CDCR may decide they better take a closer look if there are other issues like this. But that's, what's in our purview and what isn't. From my perspective, at this point in time, this is my priority in terms of addressing water quality issues.
And
That's
I'll
the
add-
best assurances I can give you at this time, but they're heartfelt. That's all I can tell you.
I will add, I think, I absolutely take your comments to heart. I think we have the same concerns. I think CDCR and the board are working cooperatively to address those concerns. But I will say, at the end of the day, if we don't get the answers that we need, this board is not shy about taking on fellow state agencies. I want to point you to the CDCR Dual Vocational Institute. That was the culmination of a long fight that this board took on and imposed $2.3 million in administrative civil liability in 2017. It's in recent history against CDCR. This board has also taken on Caltrans and imposed millions of dollars of obligations to them. We've taken on PG&E as recently as last year with a multi-million-dollar settlement. We are not shy about taking enforcement action when enforcement action is appropriate, even against big industries, fellow municipalities, and fellow state agencies. I hope that the next year and a half, when we get these results back, that the hypothesis that you're putting forward does not prove to be true. But if it does, you can expect that there will be a lot more action going on to figure out and eliminate those problems beneath that facility. Because whether it's groundwater, whether it's surface water, whether it's stormwater, or whether it's an NPDES permit flows, it's this board's obligation to protect beneficial uses, and they've certainly given me the mission of taking that on regardless of who is at the other end of the table. I am frustrated that the investigation hasn't reached a conclusion yet, but I think CDCR, in my estimation, is proceeding in good faith to try and figure out what those question marks are.
And let me just state, Mr. Snyder spoke to you. I concur with everything he says. He's been following this extremely closely. I'm aware of it because he's been aware of what's been going on in the paper. And you can be certain that we'll continue to follow this, both from the paper and from what staff, the feedback we get from staff.
Okay, thank you. And if you're going to wrestle CDCR, you probably should start with a big breakfast because they're going to be tough. So
thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll just point out too is that we do have a public speaking 3 minutes before all of our meetings, and if there are other issues, feel free to come chat with us.
Exactly. If it's not on the agenda, we can hear you during those 3 minutes. Like today, we couldn't have heard you during those 3 minutes because you're on the agenda, but any other board meeting, you're not on the agenda. Or I say you, the CDCR is not on the agenda with this facility. We can hear from you. Another card, Sally Barron.
Hi there.
Hi there. I've been listening to all the stuff today, and I've been working on this for 28 years. Couple of, I think, corrections. Your, what's his face over there, manager, said that didn't realize that you guys already have your industrial stormwater permit in place. And it is an interesting sewer system. It's self-reported by PIA, so you don't really know what's going out of the meatpacking plant, do you? Anyway, hi. Currently, there are two questions that I think need to be addressed here. The water in and water out into the entire Mule Creek facility, which includes PIA and includes the infill project, can't be metered in the prison because they turned all their meters off. But it would be very interesting to know how much water is coming into the facility daily and how much water is being pushed out through a sewer plant whose capacity is roughly 750,000 gallons per day. And that's all it can do. And its design capacity is for a little more, but it's never made it up to design capacity. And so anyhow, while you were talking about with the people with the olive problem, about the money that needs to be set aside to fix these problems, we have a massive problem that's been going on for 28 years. Where is the money going to come from, other than me, the taxpayer, to fix this? Because you've got a massive problem here that's going to need to be fixed. Mule Creek's been doing this a long time, and your cleanup costs are going to be astronomical on this, provided you even get a handle on it. If this were a private company doing the things that Mule Creek Prison has been doing, you would have slammed them with an immense fine. You would have shut them down, and you would have filed criminal charges. The board has done none of the above. We still have the problem. It's still running down the creek. So anyway, I would suggest that the Department of Corrections be treated exactly the same way you would treat a business or an agriculture, especially us in agriculture. An agriculturalist who got too many nitrates in the creek would be treated the same. They will be treated the same way. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Questions? Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
I have a card from Stacy Rhodes, who says maybe. No, I'm good. Okay, thank you. Once again, as we move through the process, this is time for a closing statement by CDCR. Mr. Larrabee. And if you could give insight on, if you can provide those numbers, and if not, so state as part of your closing statement, please.
You're talking about the water in and water out?
Water in and water out.
I'll just repeat what Patrick said, that those numbers are reported under the WDR reporting requirements and is public information. I don't have that information off the top of my head.
I'm sorry, I got in a conversation with the vice chair, and she has a question. Let's go to her question, then we'll come back. And go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, the residents are here, and they're very passionate about their issues. They're living in those conditions, you're not. So my question is what they have raised. They said back in 1985, when the prison was constructed, there was supposed to have been, there was a population of 1,700, and when it exceeded that, at a certain period of time, you were going to build an improved sewer system to accommodate the population. You're well over that number. Why hasn't that not occurred?
I have absolutely
That is not a good answer.
I'm sorry, it's not something I'm versed in.
You have residents here that are really concerned, and that's the answer? Okay, I just asked the question. I was
understand.
asking on behalf of the residents.
I understand the frustration.
Okay, thank
So
you.
who would know that answer?
That's a great question, but I can't tell you that either. First of all, 1985, I was in Germany in the United States Army, so I can't really speak to anything that was happening in that era in corrections.
So, if I think I know part of the answer, and again, just from working on wastewater issues in that particular area for quite some time. What the idea was, and I think in that commitment was, the difference is they've got a secondary plant out there right now. A tertiary plant treats the water to a slightly higher standard that allows it to be recycled in a different fashion. You can grow crops with it. The issue in that particular area, and it's an issue faced by the city of Ione, it's an issue faced by the collective communities, city of Sutter Creek, and the ARSA communities, that there's no place to put the water. So it doesn't matter if you have a secondary plant or a tertiary plant. You're still running out of disposal capacity, because when you are irrigating the land, it's not like the loamy soils of the Central Valley where you can just keep on putting acre foot after acre foot of water and it'll just percolate down to the deeper groundwater. It hits clays and it surfaces. So we have ARSA, the ARSA communities, City of Sutter Creek, Ione, they're all, whenever it rains a lot, they're ringing alarm bells. They're filing lawsuits because they can't use their spray fields and they just cannot get rid of that water quick enough. So it doesn't really matter if you have a secondary or tertiary plant if you don't have an NPDES permit to discharge that into a surface water. You run out of disposal capacity. Your spray fields just fill up with water. And with the development in that area, and there's been a significant amount of development in that area, that's taken even more land application areas out of commission. And then you have additional legislative measures that says, well, you can't put land application areas, not in the 20-year floodplain, but in the 100-year floodplain. That takes additional land out of commission for land application areas. So all of that is pointing in the direction of, it doesn't really matter if you have a tertiary plant or a secondary plant. Your issue isn't how high quality the water is. The issue is there's nowhere to put it. And so that's kind of that's the issue that literally every single one of those communities is facing, less the prison, but the communities in that area are facing, because when it rains a lot, they have a huge capacity issue, not in terms of what their plants are processing, but where the heck they put that water. And that is kind of, I mean, that question is going to come back in front of the board as to what the long-term solution for communities like Sutter Creek will be.
If it's a tertiary water and you're putting it into the creek, it's a much higher quality water going into that creek, and certainly it should be not impacting issues in the creek. So if it's direct discharge into the creek, given the kinds of situation you're describing, I think that's preferable to what I'm seeing.
And I think that's something that could come in front of the board. For what it's worth, the Sutter Creek and the ARSA communities, they do have some tertiary treatment capacity out there, but they don't have the NPDES permit. So they can't put it into the creek. They may be coming in front of the board at some point in the future asking for that type of permit.
Well, I think I would be very interested in that, because if they could get direct discharge into the creek with tertiary water, that would be a benefit to the creek, quite frankly.
But I don't want to, again, forecast those decisions, but I think...
And tertiary means that you've not only disinfected it, but you've removed
filtered
the
it.
disinfectant.
Yes.
And the byproducts from that. So it's pretty good water.
Yeah, and so, again, I don't know the exact decisions about what was made with the tertiary plant or the secondary
Right.
plant, but I will say that all the communities up there, it's less an issue about how much you're treating it, and it's more an issue about where the water goes.
Thank you, Patrick. The residents that raised the question, I don't think they had gotten an answer. It might not be what they wanted to hear, but there was an answer to the question that they had raised. Thank you.
And so getting back to the water in, water out, excuse me, you said you were going to stick with Patrick's answer. Do you have any more to add to that?
No, sir.
Okay, do you have anything else to say as part of your final closing argument?
I just want to reiterate, the Department of Corrections does take this issue very seriously, and we are committed to working cooperatively with the board in resolving whatever issues are in place there. I'm sorry that the residents in the area feel unfulfilled or mistrust the department. These are before my time. All I can do is commit personally to doing my best job in addressing this issue. I have the support of the management of the department, and I feel we're doing the right thing in addressing these issues moving forward.
Thank you. I'll take a closing statement from the executive officer.
And I appreciate that you're here today. And it couldn't have been easy to sit there, but you can imagine it hasn't been easy for them to live how they have either. So thank you.
I guess I have one question, and I realize that this permit is a first step, as staff noted, and I certainly heard a lot of consternation, which is somewhat well-placed, I think, from the data that we were presented. I'm curious what the timeline is for investigating this hypothetical source. It doesn't seem like that would be an extremely difficult task to determine whether those pipes are, what the integrity of those pipes are under the prison, and what the overall timeline is for reporting back to staff about your progress.
Well, as a matter of fact, I missed the meeting this afternoon that was to finalize the scope of that effort. It was scheduled for 1:30 this afternoon, so we'll try to reschedule that for next week. I hope to implement the site work effective 19 February, and depending on weather events and scheduling of contractors, it could take 3 months to have preliminary data for additional camera work that addresses the underside of the buildings that's been addressed earlier today. The water sampling, refined water sampling, is going to take much longer than that. It's going to address not only rainfall events, but also non-rainfall events.
Are there other testing methods planned other than CCTV? Is there any pressure testing or anything of that nature?
Yeah, these aren't sealed systems, so they won't be pressure tested, but the CCTV is going to address everything from the mains running through the center corridor up into the buildings along that central corridor. The water sampling is, we're still working through the details. That was the meeting I was just referring to for this afternoon, is on additional analytical methodology for water samples.
Any further questions? Thank you. Ready for the executive officer?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, I'll keep it relatively short. This is a challenging site with challenging water quality issues. As I mentioned, there are settlement negotiations ongoing for past discharges, and if we come to a resolution on that, we'll be presenting it for the board's consideration. And I certainly hope that we can cooperatively work through those issues and resolve the past violations. Moving forward, I do think that the small MS4 is a good platform, is a solid platform for the board to get the water quality results that it needs. I think that the fact that the CDCR has stepped forward and is accepting the small MS4 and is committing to comply with those requirements and the elements of that permit is very significant. I think it provides an appropriate model to address the beneficial use issues out there. And I would also emphasize that this is a tool that has been used at other prison facilities, the small MS4 permit, to address these types of issues. So I think we're moving forward. I think that we have a greater level of commitment in the past year from CDCR to resolve these issues than we've seen in the past from CDCR. I think we can fully and safely say that we are cooperating with them on addressing these issues. And certainly if that relationship does sour, the tone of this conversation could shift dramatically. But we absolutely think that we've got a good partner and that we can work forward and deal with these things and hopefully bring an information item back to the board about the proposed resolutions that we've seen out at that facility.
Thank you. Any questions of the executive officer? We'll then confine deliberation and discussion to the board, and if somebody is ready to make a motion, we can go there too.
I'll move that we approve the permit.
It's a resolution.
The resolution.
Yes.
All seconded.
Mark has made the motion, been seconded by Bob. Is there any further discussion?
You're not, oh, it was Bob that seconded. Oh, Don.
Was it?
Dan.
Dan seconded. We got him, sorry, did we read?
I have one thing to say. I really appreciate, what Patrick has said and his commitment. And I, knowing Patrick as long as I have in the way that I have, I have no doubt that that's true. And I appreciate that the gentleman from CDC is only here in the capacity that, that he can be. He just can't have information when he wasn't around. And I appreciate the residents coming in. And I think that the tone was okay. I think there's a couple times when the frustration kind of came through, and certainly referring to our executive officers, what's his face, is not something that I appreciate.
I've been
So-
called worse.
Well, I that's okay, but not in front of me. And so I would, his name is Patrick Palupa, and he's our CEO, or not our CEO,
Executive
our
officer.
executive officer. And
He might as well be our
and so-
CEO.
well, we want to try hard, but we also
Yeah.
need the respect to go both ways. So with that, I intend to support the resolution.
Thank you. So, if there's further comment, we'll take that. Otherwise, hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Bradford,
Yes.
Dr. Markham,
Aye.
Mr. Schneider, Ms. Ramirez,
Yes.
Ms. Brower,
Yes.
Ms. Kadara,
Yes.
Dr. Longley.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. We'll take a very short break and move on to agenda item 20. Let's be back in 5 minutes. Board's ready for agenda item 20. Five people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sitting down. We're ready. This is the time and place for a public hearing to consider the administrative civil liability order for Washu Fuel, Inc. of Plumas County. The designated parties for this proceeding are as follows: the board's prosecution team and Mike Cox and Washu Fuel, Inc.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Could I ask that we just delay this by about 3 minutes till we can figure out where Patrick went?
I said 5 minutes and they're not here. Let's go get them. Go get them. We'll restart.
Thank you, Dr. Longley.
My apologies, CEO What's Its Face reporting for duty.
We'll start again. This is the time and place for a public hearing to consider administrative civil liability order for Washu Fuel, Inc. of Plumas County. Designated parties to this proceedings are as follows. First, the board's prosecution team, and second, Mike Cox and Washu Fuels, Inc. All other participants are considered interested persons. Prosecution team has a combined total of 35 minutes for direct testimony, cross-examination, and a closing statement. Mike Cox and Washu Fuel, Inc. have a combined total of 30 minutes for the same. Interested persons shall limit their comments to 3 minutes, and a timer will be used. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. You swear the testimony you are about to give is the truth? If so, answer I do. Thank you. There's nobody standing up behind you, I see. Okay. At this time, evidence should be introduced on the following: whether the board should issue, reject, or modify the proposal, administrative civil liability order, and the order of this testimony, or of this hearing rather, is as follows. First, testimony by the prosecution team. Second, testimony by Mike Cox and Washu Fuel, Inc. That is followed by cross-examination of the prosecution team, then cross-examination of Mike Cox and Washu Fuel, Inc. Next, we'll move on to comments by interested persons, followed by closing comments by Mike Cox and Washu Fuel, Inc., then followed by a closing statement from the prosecution team. Please state your name, address, affiliation, and whether you've taken the oath before testifying. If you haven't submitted a speaker card yet, now is the time to submit one to Ms. Lanfranca Rosardi, our administrative assistant sitting here at the staff table. Are there any procedural issues that the designated parties would like to raise?
Chair Longley, this is Nick Knight from the Office of Enforcement, counsel for the prosecution team. I would just raise the idea that Mr. Cox has indicated to the advisory team today that he is not able to appear and is not present to provide any testimony or evidence. And so I'm inquiring, I think, at the outset of the possibility of entering our presentation into the evidence and adjudicating the matter insofar as the responsible party has not opposed anything submitted by the prosecution team throughout the course of this item.
So Mr. Cox is representing Washu Fuel Inc., is that correct?
That's correct. He's the principal.
Is he the corporate officer?
I believe he's the president or CEO.
So I have in my inbox an email basically saying that from 8:17 a.m. this morning, so 13 minutes before we began proceedings, that Mr. Cox says that to you, Mr. Knight, that he will be unable to attend the meeting today, but is available by phone. The board responded that we do not have it set up for telephonic appearances today, and that the request be denied. It is up to the board's pleasure whether we want to continue this matter or not, but I think I would attest, as Mr. Knight said, there has been no evidentiary submittals in this matter from Mr. Cox, and we have not had any legal argumentation or comments otherwise on the enforcement proceeding from Mr. Cox, save some requests from my end that may appear telephonically.
I guess my concern on hearing this today is this is an ACL for the amount of $660,251. That's a pretty large ACL. And I would like to hear input from the other side, quite frankly. But if it's the board's decision to go forward, as Mr. Knight suggested.
Did he give a reason? I mean, is he ill or is he just can't schedule it in? Did he say anything else?
There is no reason given. If it is the board's pleasure, this is an opportunity for procedural questions to be raised. We can, and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, but call Mr. Cox and from the board meeting speakers, and the board can ask these questions of Mr. Cox directly if the board is so inclined.
May I be heard just briefly?
I couldn't hear you.
May I be heard just briefly?
Oh, absolutely.
I have a comment first, please. I'm Bob
Go ahead.
here at the board. I just want to, I would like to have a very brief overview, because when somebody asks me what this was, if they read it in a newspaper somewhere, I just want to be able to respond more about it than just what I saw in the packet a little bit. And I would like to hear what attempts were made to communicate, and I guess there's quite a few, but just a summary of our efforts to communicate with this person. And clearly, it sounds like he hasn't responded at all, but I just want to know on the record that, I know it's in the record, but a summary of our efforts to communicate with this person.
And as I said, we are set up to give Mr. Cox a call if that's the pleasure of the board.
Well, I don't.
Go ahead. You have the floor.
I'm right there with you.
Have you-
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I read the package, and he hasn't responded to any communications from the board, essentially. And the fact that he responded that way this morning at the very last minute, I don't feel inclined to call him and try to have him defend his position over the phone. On the other hand, as Carl said, I would be curious if he has a position, how can we get that from him without, dragging this afternoon on with a phone call?
Yeah, and I agree with what the comments have been made, and I would be, I understand that we have a copy of the presentation here that we could read over, and it's supposed to be raining, the roads are supposed to be icy, we've got hours of drive, so I would not be in favor of going through the presentation, especially if it's uncontested. So I understand Member Schneider's position, but I would not be inclined to listen to the testimony.
Mr. Knight, you wanted to make a statement.
Thank you, Chair Longley. Just with the notion of a continuance or continuing the hearing for a period of time had arisen, and our position on that is while we would love to be able to elicit a response from Mr. Cox and Washu Fuel, and that's something we've attempted to do repeatedly throughout this. It's emblematic of his involvement in the case that he simply doesn't respond to these things. And so I think that would probably bear little fruit for the board, for the prosecution team, or anyone involved to continue with this, because I don't think that there's any evidence that he would engage the board even at that point, beyond the bare minimal engagement he's done so far. With regard to an abbreviated presentation, we do have a number of slides that discuss our attempts to contact him, our thorough review of what we believe are the historic attempts to contact him over time, and try to engage Washu Fuel with regard to the cleanup order. And so I think we could proceed with an abbreviated presentation in that regard to answer Member Snyder's questions, and then any questions that the board may have at that time.
I'm happy to defer on that to Carmen's request.
I'm ready to ask for the short presentation unless.
How short is short, if I may ask?
Yeah, how short is short? Good question.
Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer. We can pick out 10 slides from the presentation, go over those 10 slides. One of those would orient you to the site. 2 or 3 of those would provide a background in terms of the chronology. And then we could touch a little bit on the penalty if you wanted to,
Okay,
but less than 10.
Do I hear any objection to that? Do it. The clock is running.
Do you know which ones?
Good afternoon, Dr. Longley and members of the board. I'm going to attempt to, my name is Jason Schroeder. I'm an engineering geologist. Probably put far too much time into this abbreviated presentation, but I'll do my best here. Let me see if we can click through to some critical slides. Stop me, Clint, if you think you want to. Here, we can stop here at, so the site in question is in Quincy, California. Everybody familiar with Quincy? We can move on. It's a small community, just over 1,700 people, just so you know. This is a aerial photo of the area surrounding Allied Washoe. Essentially, this is the impacted receptors that have been encountered. MTBE is a primary constituent of concern. Quincy Community Services District sewer has picked up odors in the sewer manhole that's immediately down gradient of the Allied Washoe site. And the Spanish Creek Motel well, which was formerly a supply well, is now only used for irrigation. And the Quincy Community Service District well has actually been shut off due to taste and odor complaints and also detection of MTBE in that well. Yeah, there were a couple other sites that were evaluated that have been eliminated as responsible parties. Allied Washoe is the last remaining responsible party. I'll bring you to, that's a source area related to an above ground storage tank. This is a bulk fueling facility here. This was, there was a pumping test conducted in 2003 at the request of the board. Do you want me to go through all the animation?
Yeah, just quickly.
Okay. Sure. So essentially what happened was you saw the two down gradient supply wells that were impacted. The test was essentially turning on the Norton well, which was a 200 gallon per minute, pretty large domestic well or municipal well. Turned it on for 2 weeks. You can see this period here where it was essentially monitoring wells on site and looking at the water levels on site monitoring wells for a couple of weeks. This is after the Norton well was turned on, and you can see an immediate response in the on-site monitoring wells as a result of turning on the Norton well. Then the Norton well and the Spanish Creek Motel well were turned on, and you can see some additional drawdown in those wells. And after they turned the pumps off in the two downgrading supply wells, you can see the response was that they came back up. So what this is showing is essentially that communication between the on-site wells, where there is approximately 2,000 gallons of free-phase petroleum product up to 6 feet measured in on-site wells, and it's a likely contributor to the MTBE in the downgradient wells. As a result of that, a cleanup and abatement order was issued in 2007. A couple of the major items of the cleanup and abatement order were submittal of a corrective action plan and quarterly monitoring of all on-site monitoring wells and the downgradient supply wells, and submitting quarterly reports. Essentially, they submitted a corrective action plan in 2008, about 8 months late. Staff responded and deemed the corrective action plan inadequate, requested an amended cap, which they did not submit, and a long period of trying to get a corrective action plan out of them occurred, essentially with a pattern of behavior emerged where essentially they were submitting drafts of the corrective action plan, and yes, sure, sorry.
Yeah, you're on slide 33. Go back to slide 28.
Sure.
And so he doesn't own the company, but he still retains ownership of the property.
He
Is that
does
correct?
own the company. So in 2014, kind of skipping ahead, he sold assets to Flyers Energy. Flyers Energy did not want to purchase the land because of the contamination. So there were 2 sites within Allied Washoe Fuels that Flyers Energy did not want, that site and then one in Susanville. So they purchased assets but did not purchase the land. And then he went out of business, so in California, retained his business in Reno.
So you talk
in
about
Nevada.
assets. The assets include buildings and tanks and things such as
Not
that?
the other buildings at other sites, as I understand it, and
But not-
trucks, fuel,
But not-
accounts.
But what
Correct.
I'm getting at is, are there tanks on this site that are still contributing to the problem?
Yes, they never. So part of the corrective, the cleanup and abatement order was that they were to submit AST upgrade plan. There was some conversation back and forth with former staff, essentially that they decided to dismantle the system, but the tanks are still there as they were in 2007.
But Flyers Energy, are they still contributing to the problem?
Flyers Energy did not purchase the infrastructure of this site. All they did was purchase assets of Flyers Energy, and Allied Washoe no longer conducted business after they sold assets. And in fact, Mr. Cox, who was the CEO of Allied Washoe, became a consultant for Flyers.
So what I'm hearing is when we see a picture of that site.
Correct.
With its buildings, with its tanks, that is still property of Mr. Cox.
That is correct.
Okay, go on, because that was a bit confusing as I was going through.
Sorry. So essentially, they submitted draft corrective action plans throughout.
Mr. Schroeder?
Yes.
Just want a point of clarification. It's the property of Mr. Cox or Mr. Cox's corporation?
It is the property of the corporation.
Thank you.
Of Allied Washoe or Washoe Fuel Incorporated, doing business as Allied Washoe. So in terms of compliance with the CAO, which is really what the violations are related to this case, they established a habit, essentially, of submitting drafts and wanting assurance from the board that they would be able to close the site imminently, which we requested repeatedly. We provided comments. They said we want to submit a draft, you provide the comments, and then we will incorporate those comments into the signed, stamped corrective action plan. Happened over and over again with multiple staff, and probably 6 or 7 times, I didn't quite count throughout the presentation, but multiple times as early as I started the board in 2017, and they in fact submitted a draft copy to me. They refused to submit the signed, stamped copy. And so that's what the violation was. We repeatedly tried to get them to come into compliance, following all the way through to Mr. Knight, communicating with them our intent to submit an administrative civil liability complaint, and engage in communication with us so that they could come into compliance. And essentially, they went quiet on us repeatedly. So we submitted that. We actually, the other issue that's the violations that I can fast forward to the violations. The second violation was after 2014, essentially all work stopped at the site. They did not, with the proceeds of the Flyers Energy asset sale, they did not conduct any corrective action on the site. He basically went back to Reno and went about his business, left the site as it was, and now rents the property to 2 other businesses. So here's a violation overview. So violation 1 is failure to submit adequate corrective action plan. Violation 2 is the failure to conduct quarterly monitoring and submit quarterly status reports. They did semi-annual sampling between 2007 and 2014, never submitting quarterly reports as required, and never sampled the down gradient supply wells. And as I stated, as of 2015, all work stopped at the site, and that's where we began the violation. So there was a inspection that happened and a meeting on site in January of 2014 with staff, Mr. Cox and his consultant McGinley, at which time they promised to submit the corrective action plan and begin work again, and it began this whole draft and then silence, draft and then silence, draft and then silence.
Okay, so if the board is to does approve this ACL today, the site's still not cleaned up, still
Correct.
needs to be cleaned up.
Correct.
And how do we make sure that happens?
I don't know how much I can say based on conversations that we have had with them in confidence, but there have been some strategies discussed to pay for the cleanup.
This is Nick Knight from the Office of Enforcement. We are continuing to engage Washu Fuel Incorporated and have had some communication with Washu Fuel, and we are going to continue to pursue compliance at the site.
Are the current tenants on the site still operating it as a fueling facility, and are they potential PRPs as well?
No, Feral Gas is a natural gas supplier, which has a large tank that actually goes over part of the area that needs to be remediated, and then it's basically a truck repair shop. The tanks have just been sitting.
Thank you. Questions? Okay. We don't have interested persons here. We have, I guess we're ready for a closing statement by the prosecution team.
Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer. Before I forget, we'd like to enter the presentation, the evidence, and the associated files into the record.
Accepted.
As seen today, again, similar to some previous cases we presented to the board yesterday, Mr. Cox has been very challenging to communicate with after a very lengthy time in trying to reach out to him and his consultants. It was only when we issued the administrative civil liability complaint that Mr. Cox responded. Even with that response and even in his communications with us, what he's willing to offer is limited, both in information and remedial strategy moving forward. Nonetheless, we're committed to making sure that happens as we move forward. One of the troubling parts about this case, and as Jason alluded to, Mr. Schroeder, was that there's a long-standing contamination problem here associated with this site. It's impacted a disadvantaged community, potentially significantly disadvantaged community supply well to the point where they've had to shut it off. They've made several requests to the board for advice as to whether or not they could turn that well back on. We've recommended that they do not. It's our hope, and was our hope in issuing the administrative civil liability, that we could work a settlement with Mr. Cox such that we could essentially take this money and work with the State Water Board to repair or replace the city's well. That didn't happen, but we're still hoping that that's certainly the case moving forward. That said, the prosecution team recommends that the board adopt the penalty as proposed.
Any questions of the prosecution team? Hearing none, we'll close the hearing and ask for any comments that the executive officer or advisory team council may have.
Well, I think as an initial matter, we had in the files presented to the regional board members, simply an ACL complaint. It has been past practice of the board just to present a complaint, and it would be finalized into an order later, but we discontinued that practice a number of years ago and actually get the order in front of the board. The complaint has all the substantive charges that are in the ACL order, but to make sure that we were all proceeding with the same conclusions, David Lancaster prepared an ACL order, which he has emailed and provided to you, I think, in hard copy as well, which basically takes the complaint, crosses out complaint, puts in order, and then restructures certain parts of the complaint as an order. I don't think that there's any prejudice to the parties. The complaint provides all due notice as to what is going to happen if the allegations are not challenged in front of the board, or what the ultimate order of the board would be. But that said, I did want to note for the record that David Lancaster did put that together and did present it to the board members. If you have any questions about that process, you're free to ask them. He has also provided it to the email that Mr. Cox has been using, and it has been provided to the prosecution team as well.
No, I appreciate that, and in fact, that's the way it normally happens in civil court too. The parties show up with their proposed order, and then it's executed by the judge there on site. So this seems consistent with the way civil litigation works.
And next go around, we'll make sure that we have the order for you in your package, as opposed to this late in the game. But like I said, there are no changes to the substantive allegations between the order and the complaint. So there's not a noticing issue.
I believe the order's online, though, if I'm not mistaken.
Is the order online? I don't believe so.
I do not believe so. Let me.
It was just a complaint
Okay.
in this matter. But as to my recommendation, I mean, I think that it's hard to read into the future with these types of cases. From the allegations alleged in the complaint and from the testimony received here today, it's clear that this is a very, very recalcitrant party. I would not bet on Allied Washu coming forward, particularly after this order is issued, in any way, shape, or form to cooperate with the regional board and invest more funds into this.
Well, then the appropriate actions, referral to the AG office and so forth, have to be done. And we have to move on because this site needs to be cleaned up.
It may very well be that this is an orphan case at this point. We have an out-of-state actor with a defunct out-of-state corporation owning the site. We can certainly inquire, even if we adopt this ACL order, my request would be for Clint to work with the Office of Enforcement to see if there are mechanisms available to kind of go after some additional assets. It would generally require piercing the corporate veil and going after Mr. Cox personally. Again, there may not be evidentiary support to do that. This could just be a very typical orphan case, in which case there are funds available statewide to remediate the site, but
he's collecting revenue from the site. I mean, there needs to be appropriate actions taken, whatever those are. We'll leave that to you.
Yeah. It would be. We'll try and my request to Clint and his team is to pursue those avenues and get us a report back as to what avenues could be explored or not. Either way, my guess would be we would lien that property, and then that would prevent any profits from being made on the property. If remedial activities were undertaken at the property, we could issue subsequent liens on the property for the work that needed to be done. But again, My recommendation is to move forward with the administrative civil liability order as proposed, and to continue exploring avenues of getting cleanup, so that we can remediate these wells, even if it involves state funds going into this site and then affixing another lien to the property.
Any discussion by board members? Someone ready to make a motion?
I would move to issue the ACL and adopt the order in the $660,521 amount as presented.
Second?
I'll second.
Garmus moved, Bob seconded. Please call the roll.
Yes.
Mr. Schneider? Ms. Brar? Mr. Bradford?
Yes.
Ms. Cordaro? Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, staff.
Move on to agenda item 21, annual enforcement update. Make sure you put this one on your numbers.
Good afternoon, Chair Longley, members of the board. My name is Kim Sellards, and I'm a supervising engineering geologist. We have about 40 minutes of presentation, and if it would be the board's pleasure, we can probably shorten that to about 15 or 20 minutes.
That would be within the board's pleasure.
Thank you. Previously, you heard from Rob LaRue. He was our former enforcement coordinator, and he presented the last 4 years. There's been some changes in his duties. He is the tribal liaison, and those duties with the recent changes have now become full-time, and so he is going to be helping out with basin planning, and I will be the enforcement coordinator. So today we're going to go over some of the compliance and enforcement numbers. We're going to talk about some special projects that we've been working on with compliance and enforcement staff, and also with all of the regional board staff, in particular the fires. And then we have a few case studies where we'll just look at some fun pictures and priorities. So enforcement tools, we have a number of enforcement tools available to us, and we typically use the progressive enforcement. So we step through informal enforcement actions, and then as we cannot gain compliance, then we go to formal enforcement. We use the water quality enforcement policy that was put in place by the Office of Enforcement. It's a 2010 document that was revised and updated in amended in 2017. And it includes penalty methodology, which you've seen a number of times in the past couple of days. We have 138 staff that perform compliance and enforcement. That equates to about 57 personnel years. And of that, 25% are in Fresno office, 21% are in the Reading office, and 54% are in the Sacramento office. Some of the programs have dedicated compliance and enforcement staff, and if you look at the table on the left-hand side, you'll see the 3 programs with dedicated compliance and enforcement staff, and if you look at the right-hand side of the table, you'll see that there are other programs that don't have dedicated compliance and enforcement staff. Those staff also perform permitting functions. And you can slow me down too, I'm just trying to speed it up. So the compliance and enforcement data, we conducted 1,820 inspections, and that's pretty consistent with the last 10 years of averages, which is right around 1,900 and, let's see, a little over 1,900. This is inspections per region, and so if you take a look at Region 5, that's our 1,820 inspections and how we compare to the other regions, and we're just slightly below Region 4, which is the Los Angeles region.
Yeah, but the Los Angeles regions are doing that on their MS4, I think.
You know, they can get a lot of inspections per day because they've got a lot of facilities clustered in a lot of areas. So that I like our numbers. I like our numbers.
Yeah.
If you adjust it for size of the region, I
Miles
think
traveled
we're
and that sort of
a
thing.
few miles ahead of
You
them.
go back to
That was exactly what jumped in my mind, Carl, is how many miles per violation?
They don't even get back in the car. They just walk another.
Inspections
Okay,
per square
and-
mile, I think we're in good shape.
And back a few years, we had all those inspections. I could be wrong, but I think that was part of the, when we were getting the irrigated lands program up, and we were having to do an awful lot of inspections at that point in time.
You're right. There are higher numbers in 2012 to 2015.
Exactly.
We had
So
some focused initiatives at the time.
There's reasons for that.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to.
That's okay.
But it just kind of, why I do that is because I get in a meeting with these other guys and they come in, whoa, we do all of these inspections. Come on, give me a break, go on. I'm sorry to
So,
interrupt.
just to follow up on that, in 2012, we had confined animal facilities where we were doing additional inspections. In 2013, stormwater, and then in 2014 were the oil field facilities.
Well, and the complexity of doing an inspection when you have to coordinate with SWAT, I mean.
It gets challenging. I think I think relative to the resources that we have, we've got very, very good enforcement numbers out there.
So while staff are out doing those inspections, they identify violations, and that's the need for our enforcement program. And so in the last fiscal year, 2,665 violations were identified. There are two main types of violations. There's reporting violations, maybe a late report, and there's also non-reporting violations that are typically identified during inspections, complaints, or other notifications of a discharge. Let me say that again. Reporting violations include a number of issues like submitting reports late and exceeding effluent or discharge limitations. Non-reporting violations are typically identified during inspections, complaints, or other notifications of a discharge. So this is the progressive enforcement process, and there's another slide on this. But you start off with informal enforcement actions such as notices of violation, and then you escalate to some point where you see an administrative civil liability case, or even taking a case to a prosecutorial agency such as the Attorney General's office. And these are our numbers for 2018. If you start at the bottom of the pyramid, you see the informal enforcement actions, 6,304. A lot of those come from the Irrigated Lands Program, which has sent out over 5,000 letters. And then you get to the notices of stormwater noncompliance, 678. Investigative orders, 94. Time schedule orders, 7. Cleanup and abatement orders, 14. And then we get into the ACLs. And we had a total of 42 ACLs. Of those 42 ACLs, 26 of them are for mandatory minimum penalties. And so as you walk up through the progressive enforcement process, of course, the staff resources and commitment and also increase. So for SEPs, last year we had 3 SEPs that were part of our ACLs. And one of them was to supplement equipment for sanitary sewer overflow response in Nevada County. Then we had 20 acres of trees planted in El Dorado County. And then the third one is funding the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for aquatic restoration in Alpine and Amador counties. There's a resolution that we'll be taking to the State Water Board on April the 2nd, and that is to be able to, let me read this one. Regional board staff are taking this matter to the State Board because the SEP policy, which was revised by the Office of Enforcement and approved by the Office of Administrative Law in 2018, allows the regional boards to waive the discharger's liability with respect to the project with the State Board. So,
I'm sorry, could
yes.
you just, going back one slide, how are we doing with the Rose Foundation?
So the goal is to take the Delta RMP resolution to the board first, the State Board, and then once we're familiar with the process, because there's a lot of submittals that go into that leading up to the board meeting, and then we'll go forward with the Rose Foundation, submitting that to the State Board.
And that's necessary to continue doing?
So, Member Schneider, maybe I can answer that briefly. So over the past year since that new SEP policy has been adopted, we have not been able to get any SEPs for the Rose Foundation, and it's largely due to sort of structural issues, the things that changed in the SEP policy. And so what we're attempting to do is to structure as Ms. Sellers mentioned, first with the Delta RMP program, and then with the Rose Foundation, to structure those somewhat differently so that we can again kind of ramp up on those. And we believe that once we go to the state board, assuming the state board does approve those resolutions, that we will be able to start rolling those out again.
Would you, when you go in front of the state board for that, would you like to have a regional board member present?
We'll, I think as we schedule that, let's see what the conversation is like. I think we're at the point where these will go through relatively easily. I'll assess with Andrew in advance and put the invitation out. I think particularly with respect, Denise, I know you have a lot of involvement with the Rose Foundation, some of its projects. If there's wavering support at the state board, I think I would put the invitation out to the regional board to give them some backbone to do this, because I think Andrew put it nicely. This is a workaround to what we see as a mistake in the SEP policy. Andrew was tasked about a year and a half ago when the SEP policy was moving forward to advance the regional board's position that we should make it easier, not harder, to get settlement money going towards both the Delta RMP and to the Rose Foundation and those projects to benefit disadvantaged communities. There's still some language that allows it. I think the way the state board will allow it now, though, is they want to make the final decision. And so what Andrew's teeing up right now is essentially a way for the state board to reopen the door that they closed a couple years ago. The reason that we're doing the Delta RMP first is not a policy preference to get the Delta RMP done first. It's just there's a little fewer moving parts with that one as opposed to the Rose Foundation and its lengthy list of policies. So we're going to get the Delta Regional Monitoring Program in through the door. We think that there's support for that one, and then get the disadvantaged communities one through the door, and that'll allow us to keep doing the work that we were doing before the new SEP policy came into effect.
I think you can get support from this board at that meeting if you need it, or either one or both of those.
I will absolutely reach out if it looks like there's any problems at the state board level.
I'd like to know when that's actually at a board hearing.
It will be at a board hearing, but I think it's an open question of whether there's going to be any discussion or whether it's on the consent.
I'd like to know when it is.
Certainly.
In any case.
If it's on the consent calendar, we may even want to thank them.
Do you have the date?
You just give me a few seconds and I'll give you the date of the hearing.
For the RMP one?
April 2nd is what I have on my, is that not correct?
That sounds correct. I'll verify it in a second.
Okay. We trust that you'll be contacting us. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to talk about some special projects that staff have been working on. First of all, we'll talk about the fires, and then we have Cal EPA Stockton Environmental Justice Initiative, the Steelhead Creek cleanup that you heard about yesterday, American River Parkway, and then there's some additional changing in staffing and duties that go along with that. So with the car fire, the Reading staff, with assistance from a few staff from the Sacramento and Fresno offices, conducted an assessment of the burned areas. They were also able to secure $8,435,200 of funding for sediment and erosion controls to be installed through a contract with the Western Shasta Resource Conservation District, and they're also performing water sampling. Now, we were called to help out with these based on our experience, the regional board's experience with water quality protection, including stormwater erosion and sediment controls, water quality analysis, including collecting water samples, and also our ability to secure state and federal funds, and just getting facilities into compliance. So the Reading office, the majority of the Reading office organized into 4 teams. It wasn't just compliance and enforcement staff. It was a large effort. And so they organized into 4 teams. The 4 teams took a look at hazardous waste, regulated and unregulated sites, municipal stormwater, and non-point source issues or potential issues. Here you see pictures of some culverts, and these are the types of assessments that they were doing. On the left-hand side, you'll see that some of these culverts are either plugged or damaged, and so they were going through and assessing what types of repairs may need to be made. Here's an example of treatment on a hillside on a steep slope, and the picture on the, let's see, the photo shows the difference between treated and untreated areas. And the treated area on the right, you can see that there's more grass growing, also called green up. I find this one interesting, so I'm going to go over my notes on this one. An interesting aspect of the sediment and erosion control installation is that the federal government requires an assessment of the effectiveness of the work performed. The first photo shows a control plot called a microplot that is used to measure the effectiveness of treatment by weighing the sediment that runs off. The second photo is a method called grid sampling. The length, width, and depth of rills and gullies are measured and the volume is calculated. Once the volume is calculated, that volume is used to determine the volume of soil lost. With the car fire, they've been sampling 15 locations. So far, 3 rounds of sampling have been conducted. To date, no major instability, landslides, or chemicals in the water have been detected. Elevated concentrations of some metals have been reported, but these metals are naturally occurring in the soil. Also, elevated sediment in water has been reported based on turbidity and total suspended solids concentrations. Additional sampling is needed to better determine trends. The Mendocino Complex fire burned 459,000 acres. In comparison to the Carr fire, it burned significantly fewer structures. 280 structures were burned in the Mendocino fire versus 1,604 structures in the Carr fire. The state, we were able to secure $605,000 from state funding and also $70,000 for water sample analysis. And here's a picture of some of the $605,000 in work. They're hydroseeding a hillside. Here's an example of a straw check dam. The straw check dam, let's see. The first photo shows a series of dams called check dams made of straw bales. Check dams slow flow, promote infiltration, and reduce erosion on the waterway. And if you take a look at the picture on the right-hand side and you look at the tan sediment from one side of the check dam to the other side, you can see it at work. Water sampling is also being conducted. The water sampling is being conducted by staff from Lake County, the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians, the Bureau of Land Management, the United States Geological Survey, with support from other tribes in the Clear Lake area. Samples are then analyzed using the $70,000 worth of funding that was secured. Multiple agencies are sampling at 9 separate locations. We've seen elevated levels of turbidity. These samples in the picture were collected on January the 16th. During that sampling event, we saw lower pH levels in streams and also high turbidity. This data is going to be used going forward to determine trends. The Camp Fire is considered the most destructive fire in California history, killing 86 people and destroying over 18,000 structures. Due to the fire occurring just before the rainy season, staff were not able to complete similar assessments or sediment and erosion control installation as at the Carr and Mendocino fires. Cal EPA has requested volunteers to help with debris removal, both at the Camp Fire and also at the Woolsey Fire in Southern California. And so far from the 3 offices, we have about 5 staff who will be going, not just in compliance and enforcement, but board staff. The Central Valley Water Board is leading the water quality efforts on behalf of Butte County Office of Emergency Services, and you can see some staff out in the field collecting samples. Elevated levels of laboratory analysis reported concentrations of E. coli, aluminum, antimony, and some polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs, that exceeded water quality standards for drinking water. Based on these sample results, state water quality officials caution the public not to drink or cook with untreated surface water from streams throughout the Camp Fire burned area. Additional data is needed to determine if the concentration detected during the January sampling are representative of post-fire surface water quality in the burn area. Cal EPA has been doing a series of environmental justice initiatives, and Stockton is the 5th initiative in their series. In 2014, Fresno, 2016, Los Angeles, 2017, Oakland, and in 2018, Como were the focus areas. The city of Stockton has industrial areas that are adjacent to residential areas. In addition, the city of Stockton has a major inland port, and we saw some pictures of that today. As part of the initiative, staff went out on bus tours, and those bus tours were attended by environment neighbors and also organizations. And during that time, facilities were identified to add to our inspection list. So far, we have partnered with the Office of Enforcement and also US EPA, and we have conducted a couple dozen inspections, primarily at stormwater industrial general permit facilities. And the picture on the right is one of the violations, some violations that we saw at a site. Steelhead Creek cleanup. You saw a presentation on that yesterday. 120,000 pounds of trash were removed, and it was a multi-agency effort, and awards were presented. American River Parkway. The County of Sacramento continues to clean up trash. In their December 2018 Ranger Activity Report, they reported that they had removed 1,600 tons of trash. Regional board staff continue to conduct weekly monitoring of the American River and Steelhead Creek, and those results are available online. Also, the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, or SCORP, is developing a study plan to determine the sources of the E. coli. With Rob LaRue changing positions as the enforcement coordinator, there are a number of tasks that are being switched to other staff, such as complaint tracking, SEP tracking, and also performance measures, and he also handled the sanitary sewer overflows. In addition, we previously had a CWIX coordinator. That's a database that we use here, the California Integrated Water Quality System, and that is a Division of Information Technology staff from the State Water Board, and the State Water Board has pulled that staff back and assigned them to other tasks.
So how does that impact our data entry for CWIX?
So,
Go ahead, Kim.
So we have we've gone through training, and we have some staff who are very familiar with the CWIX system, and so they received additional training before Joe Bell left, and they will be performing a lot of those data checks.
I think it's, and Kim's exactly right. It had to do with a pay and duty classification issue where it was the Division of Information Technology's position, and they might have been partially right, that the duty statement that the IT person that they had assigned to that was not meshing up with the CWIX classification, and that the regional board should do really what other regional boards do, and they have our highly capable AGPAs in our administrative support unit help with that type of data entry, and it really was less of a IT programming function than it was a program support function that could be managed out of the regional board. Still, it was a decision that came quite suddenly, and when it happened, and we scrambled around and are still working through the issues. I think it, for what it's worth, I think, and Clay is working on this, Andrew's working on this, and you know, Clinton and Adam as well, to try and figure out how we can get more resources for administrative support, because realistically, the AGPAs that we have, the Assistant Governmental Program and Analysts, are exceptionally capable and a great resource, and having them do stuff like this, data policing, really can take some of the load off of our program staff to do their core functions.
It may be called support, but it's very operational.
Oh, it's critical.
Such a big point of what you're doing that it's like monitoring. It's the first money that goes, and it's the most critical part of it.
I agree.
Okay, I guess we can talk about this sometime later, but it's really something that kind of irks me when they pull resources like that.
It is the one of the Kelly's first tasks to work through in her new position.
Wonderful.
If I could just add one quick thing, I think, Dr. Longley, that despite those sort of staff losses and moving around, I think Ms. Sellards is actually making quite a bit of headway into helping us to get that data collection and everything squared away.
That's nice, but then that takes that person away from something else they
Sure,
could
well,
be
that's
doing.
true.
Yeah.
That's true.
It technically wasn't our resource to begin with. Again, this goes into.
Yes, it was, because it was given us to by the state board, recognizing where we needed some help.
It actually was a state board person. It was
I understand.
Bob Chow and his staff are.
Well, I'll let it go, but.
Yeah. No, I had this conversation, for what it's worth, a few times, but you know, we work on getting our missions aligned. We work on making the most of resources, and suffice it to say, I think John Russell, Bill Damian, whenever they see me, I have adopted Pamela's old position, and they hear the same things about we need more resources, and so. Yeah, they have this little, not to characterize it, but a little bit of a sheepish look, and all right, we know you need more resources, but it's an ongoing conversation, to be sure.
While we're stopped, I had just a couple of sides actually, but whenever I see pictures of hydro seeding, it's always sort of a red flag, and I wonder what they're seeding and what area and where the seeds came from, whether native or not. The other comment is just when I see pictures of that with sampling and turbidity, I wonder if we're catching storm events or not.
Okay, on the
Rich is the guy to answer those.
Yeah, on the hydro seeding.
I don't really expect an answer. I get one. That's great.
Yeah, a lot of what was sprayed was Flexterra FGM, which is a really upper end bond and fiber matrix. And the seed under it was a sterile seed, so it popped up super fast and then died back. And that kept, and then there was in some areas there was some native seed too, but the idea was to get quick grass growth. And the second question on the turbidity, the second question was, sorry.
Turbidity, are we sampling during are we capturing storm events?
Yes, and the problem is we don't have metering stations everywhere, so it's a little difficult to calculate flow. But on the Mendocino Complex fire, we're utilizing the stations we have to try and get what flow data we have, because a lot of what we're doing there is to try and give us some good information on the TMDL in Clear Lake so that we can get a better sense of how much did the fire impact the Clear Lake, and how will it bloom in the summer and that kind of stuff.
Well, if Jennifer's happy, I am. So.
Yeah. And Bob, out of all the staff in all three offices, Rich is probably the one guy who can answer those questions just about. So you got lucky on that one.
I said there are little asides, but yeah, thank you very much.
Sure, of course.
I'm going to turn the presentation over. We're going to walk through a compliance case study, how staff have come alongside a discharger and help them to come into compliance. Rich Moll.
So I'll go through this pretty quick just in the interest of time, but we wanted to talk a little bit about a facility that's doing well. We do a lot of industrial inspections. A lot of them have issues, but I think it's important to talk about some facilities that do well too. So this is a facility that we've inspected. I've inspected 3 times since 2010, and they've really gone a long ways to try and come into compliance. So it's a foundry facility. Foundry facilities are notoriously hard to manage from an industrial stormwater standpoint. It's been in business since 1854. It's the oldest foundry west of the Mississippi River. They serve clients all over the world. It's a 3.5 acre facility, so it's big. and it has a lot of moving parts to it. So the facility manufactures steel castings and valves, fittings, and apertures for plumbing fixtures and water distribution systems. And it's a full shop. So they do the offloading of castings, the solid handling, the preparation of metal charges, metal melting, pouring, production, and product shipping and storage. In the picture, you can see they're doing the shakeout. This is where they actually, they pour the metal into sand molds, and what they're doing is they're shaking it out of the molds. And in order to protect water quality at this facility, they actually do it under a roof, under cover, which has been a big improvement, and they actually built a structure to do that. They've continually upgraded their equipment and manufacturing processes to keep up with the industrial changes, and they've kind of done the same thing for stormwater management. They've continued to improve and upgrade their BMPs. Here you can see that they've got everything up on pallets. They sweep on a daily basis. Dust was always an issue at this facility when I was there, so what they do now is they sweep on a daily basis and keep the concrete surface, which was new 3 years ago, very clean. Now, this particular facility has elevated levels of iron and aluminum. They had other exceedances prior, but now they've got it back to iron and aluminum. We regulate a number of facilities with elevated levels of iron and aluminum. And this facility has a combination of concrete, asphalt, and gravel surfaces. And to reduce pollutants, they put a lot of concrete runways. So the stormwater is actually running on concrete or asphalt, and it's not picking up the iron and aluminum that's a lot of it's in the rock that the gravel they put down. The other thing, the nature of the foundry business, as I said, is difficult, and the particular layout of this facility is hard. We inspect a lot of facilities where they were never designed for stormwater management. This is one of those. So what they've done is they've built a lot of overhead structures, and they're storing a lot of their material under roof structures during year-round to try and minimize exposure to stormwater runoff. A typical foundry of this size produces a lot of waste sand from the casting process. Foundry sand is a high-quality silica sand, and spent sand is either recycled in a non-foundry application or landfilled. At this particular facility, the sand was a huge issue. It was piled up everywhere outside. It would get into the storm drain system. It would discharge off-site. They spent several $1 million to put a new sand reclaimer system in. It's under 220 by 40 overhead building. It's in an overhead building, and it's really made a difference in cleaning up the site. So they've done a good job with that. It's also made them more efficient. They buy their sand from Nevada, and they truck it in, and it's very expensive. So it's also cut down on the amount of sand that they use. So it saved them money from that standpoint, from a business standpoint too. They've had issues with material handling and waste management in the past. They have multiple bag houses at this particular facility. They create a lot of dust. And so they've used sealed super sacks now. And the sealed super sacks have really cut down on the amount of dust that they have just on the concrete surface. And here you can see in the picture, it's really pretty clean. And this is typical of that facility. Again, they sweep every day, but the bag houses were still creating dust. Like most foundry facilities that we regulate, they have a lot of metal. They have a lot of scrap metal outside. Some of this material, this is product or material that they'll use, equipment that you can't just go out and buy foundry equipment, so they'll buy old equipment and then they kind of repurpose it. Some will be used back in the plant. A lot of it will be melted down for raw materials. This particular facility goes out and buys manufacturers that have gone out of business, takes their equipment and actually cuts them up and uses it for raw materials. So in this picture, it doesn't look too bad. Right now, there's stuff everywhere out in that particular facility because they just bought a whole plant. But it is up on pallets, which helps a lot, so that's improved the situation. Now, one of the requirements of the permit is erosion and sediment control BMPs in the industrial permit. So here they've installed some fiber rolls to try and reduce some of the sediment. There's a sediment basin in the background. They're trying to reduce the fiber rolls are trying to reduce some of the sediment flowing to the sediment basin. They're partially working. It would have been better had they extended them all the way across, because if you look at the one in the foreground, it just kind of, the water sort of went around it. That's really not what we have in mind. But it was somewhat helpful. Here's a good shot of the sediment basin. They constructed a large sediment basin. It's 25 feet long. It has a concrete floor and has a 3.5 foot high concrete wall. And it's designed to flood upslope areas, which creates additional sediment in the sediment basin, which isn't working very well for them. So they're going to change the way they've got this basin structured in the very near future. As soon as they can get in there, as soon as it dries out, they're going to do that. At the top of the sediment basin, this kind of shows what it looks like. It's pretty full the day I was there. This was immediately after a pretty significant rain event, and it was going to discharge if it continued to rain, which it did as soon as I left, and they were going to take a sample. They're consistently sampling at this facility and really trying to dial in their best management practices to try and minimize any stormwater runoff. And so this is just an example of one facility that's trying to do good. Every facility we regulate and inspect has a different set of issues and challenges when it comes to stormwater management. But I just wanted to quickly show at least one facility that's trying to get a handle on it. And it's a challenging facility, particularly a foundry facility can be difficult.
So this is a cannabis facility that also staff worked with to bring into compliance, and it's in Yolo County. I don't have any pictures of green plants, I apologize. Staff initially visited the site to perform a standard compliance inspection, and they identified sediment and erosion issues. This is a culvert that's going, it's an access road over a water course. And staff were out on site, they issued a notice of violation, and then the cultivator has since made significant progress in returning the site to compliance. And the picture on the right shows the rock that they've added around the culvert and also rock on the road bedding. These photos show an access road on the same site. The access road is constructed on a hillside above a seasonal tributary and water bar used for road drainage. During the initial site inspection, the access road did not have appropriate surface materials and showed signs of erosion and sediment discharge. The cultivator has since reconstructed the water bar, placed rock inside the ditch and water bar inlet, and has placed crushed rock on the road surface. So rounding it out, the priorities for next year for compliance and enforcement. So the State Board, one of their priorities or metrics is to ensure that all mandatory minimum penalty violations and Class 1 violations are addressed within 18 months. And then internally with our work plans that we develop for compliance and enforcement, we've set two priorities for 2018-2019. The first one is the Central Valley Salinity Alternatives for Long-Term Sustainability Initiative, or CV SALTs, compliance and enforcement. So we're involved in meetings, helping to get ready so that when that is approved and taken before the State Board, that we can hit the ground running with notices and also with tracking tools. And the second is developing database business rules for compliance and enforcement actions. So there's been some concern in the past, are the numbers correct that we're reporting? And we're starting to go through that and figure out if there are issues. One of the things that we've made a change to since then is that letters that were 13267 letters and notice of violations may have only been counted as one, and we're now counting those as two. So we're going through the different violations and metrics and seeing if everything's being reported correctly in the databases. And then if not, we're going to start making changes. Are there any questions?
Very interesting presentation. Are there any further comments or questions? We've commented to you as we've gone along. I'm sorry. We made comments as we've gone through the presentation, yeah.
I just had one. I don't know if we used to do this, but sometimes, you know, we have recognition for our employees, and I wonder if on an annual basis is something we should consider a recognition of some of the good actors and success stories or not. But I'll leave that for an answer for another time.
Yeah, I mean, to be frank, that's why we gave the award to the folks who did the Steelhead Creek cleanup. But I think there's some interest in institutionalizing that, and some of the facilities that Rich is talking about. Rich had a hand in the Steelhead Creek one too, obviously, but I think it's good. We're trying to figure out brainstorming whether to call it a stewardship award, board chair award, or something like that. But where there is extraordinary commitments being made, we'll see what we can do to recognize them.
I think it's a good idea. When they get awards from other organizations, a company as an example, they tend to put it in a prominent place for folks to see.
Yeah.
It apparently has significant value to them, so to recognize them for good actions, I think is appropriate.
Above and beyond.
And I would like to know that Rich Moll is one of our employees of the month. So when you come into the lobby, if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see his name. Also, Jonathan Muir in the Compliance and Enforcement section here in Rancho Cordova.
I'd like to suggest, since you're talking about the acknowledgement of the staff, we do is it the annual, when we did the slideshow, whatever, whenever, you know what I'm talking about?
The annual report?
Yeah. So it's just
Yeah.
a thought, I mean, throwing it out, you do the annual report, and in that, what some of those success stories can come out. I mean, because that's what, as you're talking about the annual report and things that have been done, that's the time to talk about accomplishments or success story.
Yeah.
So it would fit nicely into that, because the public is seeing what's been done, but there's also some good news to report in that.
All right.
Additional good news.
I'll warn you, it's long to begin with. It
I know
might
it's
get a little long.
I'm not suggesting, but those two kind of coincide to me. How do you figure out a way to present it as?
Absolutely, and we're trying to get the good news in front of the board, and for what it's worth, we've also made the commitment and are continuing to make good on that commitment to get the good news stories out too, via press releases, via social media, to make sure that the public is aware of what we're doing, not just the bad side, but the positives too.
Yeah, I mean, I like good stories, but I really like enforcement too. So.
Oh yeah.
Me too.
Yep. Very good. Thank you very much. And that's the short version. I can't but imagine what the long version would have been.
Thank you.
Okay, we have already addressed agenda item 22. That takes us to agenda item 23, election of a chair and a vice chair. And at this time, we move to the election of the chair and the vice chair for the Region 5 Water Board. So let's start off with I think as we typically do this, we do which one first? We do the vice chair first, and then we move on to the chair. Okay.
I think it actually sometimes is the other way around. So that
I thought so.
Yeah.
I'm
just talking.
Because it can give the, if there's somebody who's interested in the chair position, but not this year, then they can potentially vie for vice.
So I'll open discussion for the chair position. I've been the chair for a number of years. Certainly, I would entertain one more year, but not more than that. I do have a couple of projects I'd like to see progress to a reasonable point, one being CV salts. We're going to be having discussions with the state board on CV salts pretty soon.
Very soon, absolutely.
And the other one is I'd like to see a white paper out on, and Clay's not here.
That's where it usually sits.
White paper out on the panel for the use of produced water in the oil fields. And after that, I feel I will have completed with the major projects that I've undertaken. But if somebody else ends up as chair, so be it. So
last year I was really strongly supportive of you because we were doing CV salts and we did approve that. So that got done. So congratulations. I've kind of been considering, and what's interesting, we used to be able to talk about this in nominating committees, and we can't do that anymore. And you can talk to one other person, but I didn't do that either. But I just want to consider Denise as chair.
I decline. And I'll be honest about it. And my community, I serve on a lot of a lot of boards. This is, I mean, it's overwhelming when I come here sometimes because I'm really trying to make sure I grasp everything. But I serve on a lot of committees. I'm in a disadvantaged community. The needs are great. So from school to youth activities to working with community centers and PUC commission, trying to get natural gas and solar into the community, every gamut of community development or community planning, that's what I do. That was my career, and when I retired, I just decided to continue to do it. But thank you, but I've enjoyed the position I've been in, and whomever wants to fall in line for that one, feel free. I'm here to serve. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, Denise would be great. I know Dr. Longley's done a great job. You know, I'm interested, and I've moved my schedule around, but I'm also, you know, willing to go next year. You know, you know, I see that the chair has big shoes to fill, and so I'd appreciate an opportunity to do some, you know, have some training wheels with Dr. Longley still on the board. But you know, I just, you know, I'm willing to wait until next year, if that's the desire of the board.
Carl is the chair another year, and you be the vice chair then, and use those training wheels and get prepped up. And it's important to serve in that role, I think, before being the chair.
Having quite a few conversations with Carmen, you're going to make me run awful fast if that's the case. Carmen, and listening to Carmen here, I won't refer to the individual. It wasn't today. It was actually a meeting in Fresno. I was sure damn happy to have Carmen sitting up here. There was, she has a way of forcing herself into the conversation and taking control. And
Her legal background.
it would be a well, it's part of her personality too. So I would be happy.
And I do intend to stay in my role as not either of those positions.
So therefore.
I second that.
Third.
I'd like to, so we're gonna, that's the vote. Have we already voted on it?
No,
Okay, I'll make a motion for Carmen Ramirez for vice chair. And we can vote on that. Do I get a second?
if it's a combined slate, we can do it in a single action. If
Okay,
that's a
well then
pleasure.
I move that Chairman Longley remains as chair and Carmen Ramirez step in as the vice chair.
I'll second that.
And that's with the understanding this is for 1 year. So, very good.
We want to call the roll?
We
Carrie?
need to call the roll. Every vote, according to the legislature.
Ms. Brower?
Karen, do you have a comment?
Unhappy.
Yes.
Mr. Schneider? Mr. Bradford?
Absolutely.
Ms. Kadara?
Yes.
Do I ask Dr. Longley?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Hey, I didn't get to vote, but I vote yes.
Carmen, yeah, Ramirez. Okay.
And Carl, if we could formally adjourn.
Yeah. They're already out the door.
I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to leave. You're going to sit here.
It is in Fresno. The location is to be determined, but it is on April 4th and 5th. And we will also continue the dialogue to see if we can fit a tour in there and potentially have another hearing if that's, or another day of hearings if that's the request.
Sorry, can you put your mic on?
Are we done? We're not sure.
We're done.